It seems like a lot of art installations were thrown together from miscellaneous parts and scraps found at a hardware store. It turns out that this is rooted in an early 20th century avant-garde movement called Russian constructivism. Today on Radio Free History, it's episode 8 of our How Art Got Ugly series. How Art Got Ugly was supposed to be almost a novelty episode about how the high-end art world became a money laundering operation. It took a little while to research, but I realized it was going to take more than one episode to tell this story. That's not a problem. We did like 2 episodes on Hitler and 2 episodes on the Mexican War, 3 episodes on the spy rings. Sometimes a story just takes more than one episode to map out the territory properly.
Like Kill Bill.
Yep. We even mentioned that in the last episode.
Look at me learning.
2 episodes became 3 episodes, then 3 episodes became 6 episodes, and this has almost become a spiritual quest for me to get to the bottom of this, because getting to the bottom of the story of art gets to the bottom of why our culture is the way that it is. When I was in university, I took maybe 2 humanities classes in my life. And I knew nothing when I started this. I knew that Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel and Vincent van Gogh cut his ear off. You learn most of that from watching Jeopardy. I knew enough to enjoy a museum when I traveled to New York or London, but this was a rabbit hole that I was going down for the first time, and I didn't quite realize how deep it went.
I've been consistently impressed by your depth of research.
Mm-hmm.
I've learned so much from doing this art cast. I'm now totally invested, and I just can't freaking wait to hear about this, especially this part of the story.
Yeah, I as they say, it's as long as a piece of string. I'm not trying to make it this long. It needs to be this long. Now, I thought starting out that art was much too abstract to cram into a single storyline. Like, I figured that every culture must have its own art, right? Well, not really. Most don't. Whatever they're doing in other cultures, making textiles or whatever, and whatever our Bleeding Heart museum curators decide to put into our museums.
Pewter stuff.
Yeah, that stuff's not art.
It's more like a craft.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever they're doing, it is not this specific intellectual endeavor that's viewed on a more lofty level than interior decoration. That is specific to the West and maybe Japan. There are so few people in the West who were able to be part of this endeavor, which didn't even go by the name art until the mid-18th century, that it was also largely self-referential. The artists in one era, they would build upon or at least modify the theories of their predecessors, but they were able to do that because there were so few of them. I couldn't give you a coherent theory of being an internet content creator because I just can't name that many content creators. Like, even the ones I can name, they're all people who were at the peak of their fame 10 years ago. Amazing Atheist and Sargon and Anita Sarkeesian and Lacey Green, they're all long since gone.
There's like some kid who pretends to be Arab, and he does these offensive interviews, like politicians go on his show. Get off my lawn!
Yeah, even that's just a ripoff of Ali G.
Yeah, no new ground being broken there.
And whatever internet celebrities there are now, like even ContraPoints and Destiny, they got famous after my life got too busy to follow internet drama. So, what do I know about being an internet content creator, even though I am technically one of them?
I just remember Contra when she was, a male atheist called Nicotine. It's weird to see that transition. That was, you see some weird evolutionary.
It was weird looking forward. Looking back on the new atheist community, it's not so weird seeing somebody become a tranny or date a tranny.
Nope.
No, I just got us demonetized. I don't care.
That's fine.
I couldn't even name any famous podcasters who didn't host Fear Factor in the 2000s.
I was just going to say, well, what did Rogan?
But the art world, there is small enough, at least historically it was small enough, that there are so few people that it is genuinely self-referential, and you can follow all the breadcrumb trails if you want. And that's kind of what we're doing here. And yet there is something else going on. Because there is that institution most central to the baby boomer generation, the university. And the 20th century university had a story about art. And when you seem to read up on the period from about 1885 to 1945, it just doesn't seem to line up with all of these contemporary primary documents that I've been reading. In fact, it's not always even internally coherent. Like, we had to do an entire episode on Monet's Water Lilies because it doesn't fit into a narrative which is laid out chronologically. The other example we gave is that American Gothic seems to be completely out of place in the 1930s with Winslow Homer aesthetic. So in the 1960s, when they expanded the university system to make sure every boomer with an IQ of 115 got a cushy job with a pension, the university, along with television, was one of the crucial propaganda apparatuses, and they pushed this incorrect art history narrative that every educated boomer seems to believe. And that invites the question, why? What's the fucking point in making the Impressionists and Vincent van Gogh sound more important than they actually were? Like,
great freaking question.
Yeah. So this is not 1968, where the university is a cloistered system where the boomers are getting trained for a life of multiple divorces, but enough equity in your house to still pay the alimony. The university system is now a rotting out edifice that is collapsing under great inflation and trying to cling to relevance by making sure that companies require an overpriced degree.
And now, like, you can just get ChatGPT to do a liberal arts degree for you.
That you can. You know what? If a university degree is training you for a useless bureaucratic job, you're going to be using ChatGPT in that job anyway, so it's not even inappropriate.
Yep. The state of things.
But since the whole university enterprise is running on fumes, they have not updated their art history curriculum since about 1976. And now it's taught by women who derive far too much of their self-worth from their degree.
Now let me tell you a little story about how far universities have fallen. Mm-hmm. I went back to school to explore history a little bit, and my university sent out an email last year telling me not to, well, not me specifically, but the entire student body to not dress in offensive Halloween costumes. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to cause a stink, but I just wanted to write them back and be like, I'm 42 years old.
I thought you were training us to be the Prime Minister of Canada. The people who teach art history classes now, they just don't care enough to ask if it makes sense. I teach the curriculum, I get my pension. That seems to be the attitude of most university instructors.
Like, it's right down to teachers. Like this, we have like a whole illiterate generation being brought up because they don't care. They're bureaucrats.
Yep. So there are a dozen of these semester-long university art history classes on YouTube, taught by spinsters who clearly think that their IQs entitle them to have their student loans forgiven, so they just parrot the same narrative, which must have served some propaganda purpose 50 years ago, but that purpose has been long since forgotten. And that narrative, it always goes the same way. We speed through a couple of centuries to the mid-19th century, and the Impressionists decide to do something completely different. We've already gone over why that's bullshit. Go back a few episodes if you can't remember. Then a bunch more happens, and we get Vincent van Gogh and Paul Cézanne and Pablo Picasso, and then you get the 1920s with modernity. And then the clouds open, and the angels start playing trumpets and harps, because now artists have complete freedom to break all the rules. And at some point, the art world gets a fetish for abstraction, whatever the fuck abstraction even means. And then the Messiah appears. Jackson Pollock starts dripping paint on a canvas that doesn't actually look like anything.
Oh, it looks like something.
Then Pollock dies unexpectedly because he's a slobbering alcoholic who wraps his car around a tree.
Yeah, now that's an artist.
Yes, he is. But now that Pollock has blazed a trail, artists have more freedom than ever, and yes, their art looks like unimpressive shit, but it's conceptual, whatever the fuck conceptual even means, and it has context, whatever the fuck context even means. And if you say it looks like shit, it means you don't respect their freedom. And you support freedom, don't you?
This is an you can say this is an anti-racist and colonial work. So if
Yeah.
you're criticizing it, really, that says more about your privilege than my hack artistry.
Yeah. Well, thank God the 1920s gave us modernity. Otherwise, we would still be suffocating in this oppressive, stifling culture where art doesn't look like dog shit. So as far as the How Art Got Ugly series has gone so far, 2 episodes became 5 episodes. And at long last, we reached the 1920s, the crucial decade. The decade of Dali and Picasso, and all the weird shit that came to be known as modern art. I planned to do 1 episode on just what the hell was happening in the 1920s, but just like the series as a whole, I wrote 1 1920s episode, and that became 2 1920s episodes. And this is the 3rd 20s episode, and there'll probably be at least 2 more, so we just get fractal level complexity. But once we get through the 20s, after the 30s, and especially after World War II, the story really is quite straightforward. The Americans are in charge of the world. The Museum of Modern Art comes up with increasingly retarded theories, and they now have a monopoly because their friends are on the editorial board of the culture pages of the New York Times. So once we get past World War II, the story is fairly simple. There's not much to tell, but up until that point, it's like Zeno's paradox. To run from point A to point B, first you have to run halfway, which takes a certain amount of time, and then you have to run half the remaining distance, which takes more time, and then you have to run half of what remains, which takes more time. Almost seems like that's how this series has gone so far. Each episode seems to cover a shorter and shorter amount of historical time. And if I could start all over again, I might have just talked about the art in the 20s and assumed you knew some context before and after. But even then, I said before that all this stuff is self-referential, and artists in the 1920s are definitely still making references right back to the Renaissance. So we might have just ended up right back where we are. So when we last left off at the end of our last episode, I said that we're structuring our story of the 1920s like the movie Rashomon, where an incident happens in the woods and it's recounted in the flashbacks of 4 unreliable narrators with different vantage points and different levels of recall and different levels of honesty. So the flashbacks aren't always even consistent with each other, but by the end of the movie you have a general idea of what happened. That's kind of the 1920s. The Paris avant-garde scene is dominated by the Dada and the Surrealist movements, which are probably better described as spectacle than art. And those guys certainly are not the most reliable narrators. Then in Italy and the Soviet Union, you have totalitarian dictatorships, and they both need propagandists. And who better than an avant-garde artist to be a propagandist for somebody who wants to overthrow the system? Germany does not get its dictator until the 1930s, and that guy is certainly related to the art world.
They were late to the party.
That they were. But halfway through the 1920s, that guy is in jail writing a book about his displeasure with the culture in Berlin.
The beer hall push did not go as he wanted.
No.
The cops failed to rise up with him.
But you know what else was not going how he wanted? The art scene.
No, he did not like what was going on.
So like, there's 4 stories going on: Paris, Rome, Moscow, and Berlin. And the characters are important, if not for their aesthetic talents, then at least for the same reason Joseph Goebbels is as a mouthpiece. So we had our first Rashomon story last time as we spoke about fascist Italy with the Futurists and the Novecento. Today we're going to be looking at Moscow. We think of the Soviet Union and you think of, I don't know, millions of kulaks starving to death, or millions of people being sent to the gulag, or a million people of all strata of society disappearing during the purges. I don't think of a lot of creativity when I think of the Soviet Union, is what I'm saying.
Not a lot, Solzhenitsyn. That's about it. Like what came out of that period, right? Solzhenitsyn and a bunch of crappy propaganda for 80 years.
Yeah. They were very creative when it came to torturing people.
Solzhenitsyn talks about that.
I'll be talking about that.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, Other than that stuff, what else do you have? You have the Iron Curtain, you have the government collapsing in the 90s, and you have a general sense of misery, sadism, and inhumanity. That's how we see the Soviet Union in the year 2025. But in the year 1917, when the West was high on its own supply about technology creating utopia, everybody looked at Russia and said, see, they overthrew the Tsar, and now we just need to wait for utopia to reveal itself in a few years because absolutely nothing can go wrong here.
What a bet to make. Oh my God. You'd have to know nothing about Russia.
And they didn't. You could not pay most Western intellectuals to say a bad word about the Russian project. And even to this day, you still can't get most of them to admit that the whole thing was folly. It was doing fine with Lenin and Trotsky in charge, but then Stalin came in and screwed everything up. Or else it's some grandiose statement like communism works on paper but not in practice. As if that fucking statement actually means anything. Alchemy works on paper but not in practice. Anti-gravity works on paper but not in practice. What the fuck doesn't work on paper?
That's a good question.
Also, about the rift between Stalin and Trotsky, that was just reality asserting itself. These utopian theories always tended to be one size fits all, as if any group of people could implement a communist system if you just applied the right theories.
Well, they're married to the idea of a blank slate, right?
That they were. Well, the reality of Russia, it asserted itself with Stalin versus Trotsky. It was not really an ideological battle as it is so often sold, so much as it was the latest round in a centuries-long cycle. Russian intellectuals, many of whom were Jews like Trotsky, decided that they were going to get on board with the latest intellectual fads from the West, and the traditionalists like Stalin said, wait a second, this is Russia. We don't settle arguments with intellectual debates, we settle them with pogroms.
We use force here.
Yeah. So when you look at the first 6 or 7 years of the Soviet Union from 1917 to about 1923 or 1924, you cannot get that many academics, even today, to say a bad word about that period.
Yeah.
And that includes the art of the period. They're hideous art. And here's a nice teaser.
Oh, God. Looks like anti-tank stuff.
Well, a few episodes ago, we looked at the art installations at the Whitney Biennial made from leftover scraps of surplus industrial material. It all looks like this shit.
Yep.
It doesn't look any different.
And this scrap looks like the frickin' stuff by the side of the highway in Calgary.
That it does. But it's not just that. This is revolutionary Russia. So absolutely everything needs to be connected to Marxist theory, and it needs to justify how it's related to the perpetual revolution. So here we are. Episode 8, 18 hours or so in, we can finally answer at least one question. When you go to the contemporary room at an art museum, you see something that looks like mushrooms growing out of asbestos with a paragraph about how it challenges us to raise marginalized voices or to challenge our preconceived notions of heteronormativity. Also, it was paid for by a cultural grant from the government.
Thank you, taxpayer.
Well, but this is exactly what they were doing in the first 5 years of the Soviet Union. It was retarded then, it was recognized as retarded then, but Western professors just can't say a bad thing about the first 5 years of the Soviet Union because it worked on paper, so we need to keep doing this ostentatiously pointless shit. So when you really pull back the curtain on the 20s, something is almost eerie or disorienting about it because the world seems oddly familiar. All of these existential questions we have about living in an electromechanical society where you're just a cog in a vast machine, they're all there at the time that this shit is made. And yet, there's not always a good reason for it. In the 20s, people weren't sure what to do in this mechanized world. Do we say we need to make sure we don't lose our humanity and our cultures in this new mechanized society? Or do we just say fuck it and embrace the factory life and learn to smile? Well, clearly some people, especially in the Soviet Union, at least among their rulers, and extra especially among the Soviet Union's cheerleaders, among the Western intelligentsia, they said, oh, this is great. We can totally wipe away all the old stuff and a new golden age is going to start. But, of course, some people didn't want to get rid of the old stuff. Some people liked the old stuff. And the question never really resolved itself to this day. And if you don't believe that, I'll give you 3 examples. The first example is architecture.
Oh, God. I think I've driven by this. This is really, really ugly.
Yeah.
And can you imagine what the neighbors think living next to this? Like,
yeah, this is something you do either because you want to piss off your neighbors or because you're a brown person who needs to build right out to the property line.
yeah, I noticed that too. That's right up to the fire.
Even the cube shape seems
Yeah.
optimized for just
A couple of
purpose.
shipping containers, you're done.
So, at the very least, this is obnoxious. Again, you drive around, it's not like you see multiple styles. You see 2 very distinct styles. You see stuff that looks like houses, and you see stuff that looks like it's efficient, let's just say.
This can't be functional.
Well, it's not whether it's functional or not. It's whether it represents this break, this bifurcation from the 1920s.
Good luck with your flat roof, assholes.
Well, on that note, here is a famous house that was built in the 1920s. This is the Reichfeld house. Now, the guy who designed this, apparently his children were mercilessly bullied in the neighborhood, as they should be.
Yeah. Can you imagine? You freaking bring down property values as much
I
as
know.
this thing must have brought down property values. You bully the crap out of your kid.
Like, well, at the very least, this is somebody just being obnoxious doing this. But this is representative of the 1920s. This is, we're going to do something different because the war is over, and let's forget the old world, and let's do something different just because we can.
I feel like there's like a Cybertruck vibe.
Yeah. Yes.
Same kind of like the future is now, kind of like heavy-handed, like.
Or you could look at it the other way and say that the Cybertruck is a 20s vibe.
Yeah.
Because the Cybertruck would absolutely fit in
Yeah.
with this aesthetic.
Yeah. Some weirdo thought the future was going to be.
I said last time that modernism went from the 1910s, but really strongest in the 1920s. It went all the way to about 1972. Here is the last gasp of modernism. Work on this building was started in the late 60s. This is Paris.
It's like a bored cube.
Can you tell what building doesn't quite match the architectural style of the rest of the city of Paris?
How'd they get a permit for this? Jesus.
After they built this, the city planners in Paris said, no more modern stuff.
Thank you, city planners of Paris. Still a
Yeah.
very beautiful city.
This is called the Tour Montparnasse. Now, if you don't know your Greek mythology, Mount Parnassus was where all the muses lived.
Oh, fuck. Can you imagine the assholes? Fucking.
Yeah, so when you think about a bunch of Greek goddesses inspiring people to be creative, I guess this is supposed to represent it.
It's like a smokestack made in Minecraft.
Well, like I said, this building it's actually the second last gasp of modernism. We will be talking about the last gasp of modernism when we get to it, but this thing is just a crime against aesthetics.
Well, I would argue crime against humanity. If they hung the guy that designed this and the people that approved this, I would vote for that ticket. I would vote for the hang these guys ticket.
Yeah. They're probably already dead, but I'd vote for the guy who wants to dig them up just to hang them.
Punish their kids.
Work with Oliver Cromwell.
Exactly.
So that's the first example of the clear bifurcation of 2 different cultural styles that exist side by side. The first example is this architecture. There's the old stuff and then there's the new stuff. And we're just expected to accept the fact that they're side by side without an explanation. The explanation is the 1920s.
Okay.
The second example is best exemplified by our good friends, the Americans.
Here they are.
Now, In our world of 2025, there are two starkly different concepts of our countries. The first is the centuries-old story of a society whose ancestral roots are on some small patch of land in Europe, maybe some frontiersmen settling the wild. And the second image we have of our countries is the economy, often reduced to a single metric, the GDP. When you look at our friends, the Americans, there are two completely distinct stories of what the United States is. The first is the story of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson and Abraham Lincoln. And the second is the industrial powerhouse personified most fully with the image of billboards over the interstate. Like Americans, they have their story of the Revolution and the Declaration of Independence being signed in Philadelphia. And they also have their stories of hopping on the interstate and driving 3 states. It's kind of hard to come up with a single story that unifies those two images in the same way that it's hard to come up with a single story that unifies the two styles of architecture seen in this picture. But I think, you know, Americans take those two things for granted and they just assume it all works out. And that's not a slight on them. I think we all do stuff like that. We don't have time to stare at our navels and wonder why some things just aren't quite congruent in our society. But yeah, when you think of the United States, there's two very, very different stories of that country. And there's just nothing that unifies them. At least I don't think there is.
It's weird. It's not hard to reconcile the two images.
Now, the third example, it's actually from the 1930s, but it's still indicative of what happened in the 20s. In 1931, Aldous Huxley, he wrote Brave New World. And that book is as relevant today as it ever was, about a gray, sterile civilization where nobody was wanting for anything. You press a button and anything you want would be delivered to your front door, much like Uber Eats.
I was telling my wife the other day that the Uber people are like the Dalits of North America.
Frequently, they're the Dalits of India.
Imported some Dalits recently to Canada as well.
More than some.
They were going to be HVAC students, and then they weren't HVAC students.
No. The most pressing issue for the ruling class in Brave New World is to make sure the Soma keeps flowing, because if the people lose their drugs, they're going to revolt. And the people who live outside this miserable gray concrete society are the savages who maintain their humanity. Again, how is that story relevant to the modern world?
Apparently, like Zuckerberg moved to an island and he's raising his own sheep. Like,
there you go. Brave New World absolutely qualifies as capital M modern. And it asked existential questions relevant to the year 1931 that are still open in the year 2025.
In the year of our Ford.
Year of our Ford, yes. Now contrast that with another novel from the 1930s, Tolkien's The Hobbit, written in 1936. Now that book is a perfect example of romanticism. It still maintains a sentimental attachment to nature and the culture and the history of the British Isles. And it's absolutely a book that people still love, but even by 1936, it feels a little bit out of place. Because Romanticism was all but finished in the 1920s. Had Tolkien been 20, 30 years older, his writings would have probably been seen in the same category as Tennyson's King Arthur poems, which caused a revival in interest in Arthurian legend, like before the Victorian era. Yeah, people knew about Arthurian legend, but it was just something obscure that, you know, in a book somewhere in the back of a library.
And somebody brought that alive in the culture again. Like,
yep.
You know, rekindled that flame. Tolkien, you know,
well,
arguably,
Tennyson.
Oh no,
Yeah.
Tolkien arguably, like he relit the love of like it's like a modern mythos.
Yeah, it is.
He like reconnected the culture with its you know, with its myths.
Yeah. Well, he did, but it still feels like a story from another time.
Oh, absolutely. Like the enemy is a fucking industrialization.
But Huxley's book was 5 years older than Tolkien's book, and I still think Huxley's book feels relevant to the modern era. So I guess that's just what I'm trying to say, is that once again you see this bifurcation. You see the old style of doing things and the new style of doing things side by side, and there's very much a contrast between them. And I'm not saying we should throw out the new way of doing things, because Huxley's book is relevant and you should read it. You should also read Orwell's 1984.
Yes,
that book is extremely relevant as well.
I'll give you the best recommendation I can give you about this book. Fascists and communists both hate this book. This is the one thing they can agree on, is that this is a book they don't like.
So, once again, we have this conspicuous divide just cleaving our culture, and we accept that there's the old way and the way we do things now, but we don't think of it as being a hard break. But in reality, it absolutely was a hard break, and the fault line was circa the year 1925. When you read primary sources from the 1920s, you very much see this identity crisis happening in real time. In the shadow of World War I, you have people, for one reason or another, starting to say, we have a glorious history and culture that stretches back centuries, but maybe it's time to refocus our culture on something new that reflects this new world of factories and mechanization, this brave new world. And you see people struggling to come to terms with the difference between the old and the new. It can be somewhat discomforting to read that stuff now, because you realize, hey, this is the world we are currently living in, and it's starting to take shape, especially the absolute obsession with efficiency. But was there ever a good reason why it started to take shape that way? Not necessarily.
Like the QWERTY keyboard.
Exactly. Some things are just a vestige of a historical accident.
Anachronisms.
The next thing to understand about the 1920s is that in the aftermath of the Great War, factories were able to produce so much shit that it well exceeded anything people could ever need. And the factory owners had made so much profit producing things for the war effort that they didn't really want to go back to just producing the bare necessities. They wanted, if they could, to build a world predicated on the notion that industry could produce and produce and produce, and they could trust their friends in government or the new broadcast media to convince people to buy all this excess shit. Every society that has ever existed has worried about production, because if you don't produce enough food, people starve. Maybe people don't worry about that in North Korea, but that's an exception. That's the exception that proves the rule. The 1920s, it marked a shift to an economy based on consumption, where the worst thing that could happen is that nobody buys all the excess inventory, and the factories, they've overproduced, so they can't cover their debts or pay taxes, and now there's not a big enough tax base to support the infrastructure, and the roads are going to collapse, or whatever the latest catastrophizing story is. So in the 1920s, the middle class is convinced to consume as much as they can, even if it means taking out ridiculous loans that they can't repay. And the whole hyper-leveraged economy is going to come crashing down in 2008. I mean 1929. I'm a millennial, and I'm never not going to be pissed off about 2008.
Seriously. Nobody got fucking hung for that.
You know, growing up, we were told that as long as you go to university, as long as you get good grades, you'll be able to follow in the footsteps of the boomers. And then no sooner do we enter the workforce, hey, the boomers crashed the economy by taking out a fifth mortgage on their house because they wanted to go on an extra vacation. I'll do a 2008 episode at some point.
Still upset. They nuked the economy of the entire world.
That they did. When some dumbass professor talks about Karl Marx and capitalism, the thing you have to realize is that Marx was living in a world where if you wanted to open a factory and make gloves, you would open a glove factory in your town, and you would compete with a bunch of other glove factories in other towns. And if you could figure out a cheaper or a better way to make gloves, you'd capture market share. And if people decided they didn't want gloves anymore, well, every supplier in the market would have to lower their prices and hopefully try to stay in business. This was more or less the world described by Adam Smith when he wrote The Wealth of Nations, but that book was written in the 1770s. The economic system that Adam Smith described was achieved by roughly the 1830s. But fast forward about 100 years, during World War I, these factories, they ramped up their production because there was a never-ending supply of European peasants who needed to be just fed into the meat grinder.
They kicked me off my land.
This will be over very soon, Angus. You promise? Assuming you don't lose your leg. Then it's going to be a real miserable life.
You see that? You see that? That's the machine gun. Just run towards the machine.
On Remembrance Day, I did some war poems. Somebody told me I had a certain level of antipathy in my voice when I was reading the World War I poems, but as there should be.
Yeah.
So after the war, all those factories said, we've just made all sorts of money running at full capacity, and we don't want to just go back to supplying market demand. Is there any way we can just create demand? And that's exactly what they did. Now, what do I mean by creating demand? Think Henry Ford, not for that reason. Think the Rockefellers. Sure, they could sell cars and sell oil into the open market, but it helps a lot if the government is building roads to create demand for cars and oil. Like in those days, the Democratic Party was wholly owned by J.P. Morgan, and the Republican Party was wholly owned by the Rockefeller family. So if you had the right connections, you could create demand for your product. This is also the age when broadcast media was something relatively new, and the age when newspapers had consolidated and were depending on advertising dollars. So if you had the right public relations professionals, you could start selling people things that they wanted instead of what they needed. And you could also change the things that people needed. And you could also lie to people and convince them that they needed your product. This was the golden age of psychological quackery, where it was normal to pay a psychologist to say that your product is good for people's sanity, and then take out an ad saying that psychologists say my product is good for your sanity. So it really doesn't make sense to talk about Karl Marx or Adam Smith in the world post-1920, because this is just a completely different economic system than the one Karl Marx was describing when he talked about capitalism. Now factories can produce as much as they bloody well please, and the biggest risk is overproduction and the excess going to waste. In 1925, you had capitalists, socialists, anarchists, communists, fascists, whatever, but they all agreed that the factories needed to produce as much as possible, and they were just arguing over what to do with the excess. There was no question about whether or not society was going to industrialize farther. The line was going to just go up, full stop. These days, you have the environmentalist or the hippie communist who talks about tearing down the machines or overthrowing capitalism or whatever the fuck they're talking about. And it's ridiculous because they're repeating an 1830s argument that was put to bed in the 1920s when people of every ideology agreed that the factories need to produce the maximum amount. Like, as a child of the 90s, the idea of wealth redistribution always seemed like it was driven by envy, especially after the Soviet Union collapsed. But in the 20s, when there was at least some novelty in this mechanized world, I can at least admit that it was a different ethical question. If the factories can produce all this excess inventory and they depend on the government to create demand for it, I can at least recognize that there's an ethical case for redistributing the excess. It's just a different ethical question than fuck capitalism because I hate my dad.
Yeah.
So as much as I hate it when I hear people talking about viewing things through a specific lens, that's the lens through which we need to view the early Soviet Union. the utopians who look to the USSR with hearts in their eyes, these people were not the crunchy hippie chick with hairy armpits who goes to live on a farming community. These people's utopia was a mechanized society where everybody punched the clock at the factory for a few hours, and then a class of managers would just make sure everything worked. When we talk about Weimar Germany, which we will very soon, when we talk about Weimar Germany, which we will in the next episode, we will be talking about the implications of having two very different radical factions who disagreed on what to do with the excess output. But the utopians, they believed that you punch the clock, go home, get a paycheck in the mail, and have so much leisure time that you would read books and the next Michelangelo would just rise to the top. We saw in 2020 what happens when you send everybody home and give them all the leisure time they want. You don't get a bunch of new Michelangelos. That societal experiment was just run.
You get a spike in addictions.
That you do. It was just accepted as a given in the 20s that this system was going to maintain itself, and that a truly civilized people would just obviously use the excess wealth to support the endeavors of the intellectuals and creatives. The intellectuals and creatives loved that thought, by the way.
Yep. They still do.
So here's an example. Here's a video game from a couple of years ago called the Talos Principle 2. It's a puzzle game, but the premise of the game is that you play this robot who has a sentient AI, and you've been put into this utopian civilization of sentient robots who have carried on humanity after the real humans have gone extinct. And just to beat you over the head with it, this town is called New Jerusalem. This is the utopian idea of the 1920s. This hits every note of the 20th century narrative. New Jerusalem isn't just this town that seamlessly blends into the English countryside. This is not some slightly pretentious Frank Lloyd Wright design built into the side of a rock face. This looks like a modern kitchen full of German-made household appliances.
And boobs.
That too. Yeah, well, yeah, that's actually good to notice. Everything has a smooth edge, and it's obnoxiously contrasting and protruding from the nature and the trees around it. If you don't want to look at video games, there's another parallel in real life. Think about how everybody cries at the image of birds covered in oil after an oil spill. When Deepwater Horizon exploded, you couldn't turn on the TV without seeing sentimental guilt porn. Funny story about that, the fish population bounced back within a couple of years to higher than it was before because the oil didn't kill the fish so much as it kept the fishermen away.
I like that fishermen are worse for the species than an oil spill.
Again, sometimes you don't know things until you run the experiment.
Yep.
But compare those pictures of the birds covered in oil with the pictures of the dead birds killed by wind turbines. You show a picture of a seagull covered in oil, it's a crisis. You show a picture of a dead eagle near a wind turbine, nobody seems to care.
That's the price of progress.
Well, exactly. That's exactly the point that I'm trying to make. I think we've been conditioned to see a wind turbine almost with this same 1960s aesthetic. Those wind turbines, they all look like they were designed by some pretentious German designer.
Like Apple.
That too, yeah, or Steve Jobs, absolutely.
They don't work consistently.
Well, but that's the thing. Just John Q. Public out there just sees these sleekly made wind turbines and say, well, there must be a system behind it that works, and we don't have to put any thought into whether this system is feasible or going to work at scale, let alone any thought into maintaining it. I'm just the ideas guy. Like, we build the wind farm, we plug in the power cord, we have power. That's the extent of the thought process. But there's just something about that aesthetic of the wind turbine that lulls us to sleep, or at least lulls most people to sleep. It looks futuristic and utopian for the exact same reason that this image on the screen looks futuristic and utopian.
Yeah, if this had wind turbines in it, it wouldn't look out of place at all.
Yeah. Of course, that's probably the reason that the West is going to have its Chernobyl. The power grid's going to collapse because we spent too much money investing in wind and not enough investing in nukes.
Yep.
But, you know, when our power grid collapses because there's no talent to maintain it and nobody is training people to replace the boomers who prevent the rolling blackouts, I'm going to say it right now, it'll be in large part because those wind turbines look like they were designed by Steve Jobs.
Yeah. Selling it to the public.
So the whole plug in the cord, get electricity attitude, I think that's the exact same thinking behind the Western elites who supported the Soviet Union. The Nazis and the Soviets, they both killed a lot of people. Yeah, that word is going to get us demonetized as well. I already said tranny, so who cares?
Yeah.
The Nazis and the Soviets, they both killed a lot of people, but the Holodomor was done at peacetime, yet we still view the Nazis as the evil empire. Why? For the exact same reason that we freak out over the birds covered in oil, but not the birds killed by the wind turbines. One was in the service of a future that the Western intellectuals wanted, and the other one wasn't. Like, I know I'm going to offend a lot of people by saying that, but it's true.
Yep.
So shoot me. In fact, don't just take my word for it. We were mentioning Orwell earlier. Let's take a look at what Orwell had to say in 1946. The notion that the machine has altered human relationships and that in consequence Machiavelli is out of date is a very obvious one. Yeah, George, I think you jumped the gun on that, especially in the age where power politics are coming back.
I like that he was too optimistic.
If one examines the people who, having some idea of what the Russian regime is like, are strongly Russophile, one finds that on the whole, they belong to the managerial class of which James Burnham writes. That is, they are not managers in the narrow sense, but scientists, technicians, teachers, journalists, broadcasters, bureaucrats, professional politicians. In general, mediocre people who feel themselves cramped by a system that is still partly aristocratic and are hungry for more power and more prestige. These people look towards the USSR and see in it, or at least they think they see, a system which eliminates the upper class, keeps the working class in its place, and hands unlimited power to people very similar to themselves. It was only after the Soviet regime became unmistakably totalitarian that English intellectuals, in large numbers, began to show an interest in it. Burnham, although the English Russophile intelligentsia would repudiate him, is really voicing their secret wish. The wish to destroy the old equalitarian version of socialism and usher in a hierarchical society where the intellectual can at last get his hands on the whip.
Trust the experts.
Yes. There it is in black and white. What is Orwell saying? I have a university degree, I'm a petty bureaucrat, and I love the Soviet Union because they let people like me have all the power.
The worst people that I worked for were the petty bureaucrats.
They're the worst people I've met in all walks of life.
Yep.
So when we talk about utopian thinking in the Soviet Union and the Bolsheviks, that's the correct way to frame it. I'm a genius, and now there's a society where I'm going to be taken seriously because I have a degree. In the Gulag Archipelago, there's a story about a Swedish trust fund kid who ends up getting tossed in the jail cell with Solzhenitsyn because that's what tends to happen in practice.
Yep.
At the end of the day, the bureaucrats are so terrified of losing their make-work jobs and needing to do an honest day's work, or worse, having a boss who they perceive as dumber than they are, that they will kill anybody who might be a threat to their cushy gig. And that's what happens in the USSR. But you see this utopian thought process playing out time and time again in the last century. In 1919, so while everything is fresh, while the Tsar's body is still warm, journalist Lincoln Steffens, he traveled to post-revolutionary Russia and said, I have seen the future and it works. Wait a little bit, buddy.
Wow, what a bet to place. Jeez.
Again, it's like every other moron with a degree in public policy who pats himself on the back for getting a safe injection site opened.
And for those of you who think this is like a bygone era, they put an academic in charge of Afghanistan.
That they did. Yeah.
So,
Well, but just if you just look at the example of the safe injection site, you've got to go back 2 or 3 years later to see if the neighborhood has turned into a zombie apocalypse or not. You don't just get to say, I convinced the government to implement my policy, put it on your resume, and then go look for another useless job. I guess that's what you do get to do, but it shouldn't be.
In the meantime, the rest of us have to freaking live Shaun of the Dead every day.
Yep.
Trying to get to the subway.
But this story repeats itself 50 years after the Russian Revolution and the Civil Rights Movement. The proponents of the Civil Rights Movement still to this day won't admit that it turned American cities into crime-ridden ghettos surrounded by suburbs built specifically to be inaccessible to the undesirables, the blacks. Let's not even be passive-aggressive about it.
There used to be a black middle class in the States.
That there did. Used to be entrepreneurial, not based on affirmative action jobs. But even more recently, in the 90s, you had Western intellectuals just bending over to blow themselves for ending apartheid in South Africa, not realizing that you need to kind of check in on the country 10 years, 20 years, 30 years post-apartheid to see if it really was a good idea to overthrow a stable system. But I guess that the Civil Rights Act and the post-apartheid Constitution of South Africa work on paper. So let's look at the first 5 years of the Soviet Union. But remember to frame it as a fantasy of the frumpy girl who is jealous of the prom queen. Or like the 115 IQ Spurg who can't admit that a lot of the jocks are as smart as he is, and who still complains about being bullied at age 28.
And who uses a anime avatar on the internet.
We all know the type. We all know the type. Yeah, the kind of student who gets an A+ when he submits the paper, and then the Gopniks are the ones who freeze to death when the policy is implemented. That's the kind of people who are in charge here. The Soviet Union between 1917 and 1923 it's a strange time and place, and for one reason or another, the art establishment in the year of our Lord 2025 loves to incorporate ideas from this period, which, let me be very clear, they were recognized as terrible ideas in their own day. For all of the pretentious talk about art pushing boundaries and starting conversations, there is not a single concept in contemporary art that was not already beaten to death by about 1923. Every mainstream art book, every art documentary, every grad student with a YouTube channel talks about the Russian constructivists using the exact same framing that Pravda and the Comintern would have in 1922. It's just weird. You know, they can talk objectively about the Impressionists. They can talk objectively, if a little idealistically, about Vincent van Gogh. They're maybe a little bit too generous when they talk about the Dada movement and Duchamp's antics with the urinal. But they still keep it in terms of these lofty abstract concepts, like what truly is art anyway? With the constructivists, not so. With the constructivists, it's hard to find a single bad word written about these people. And that should be your first clue that there's a glitch in the matrix, starting right at the end of World War I. So what is constructivism? Here's a couple examples.
Oh, God.
Does this not look like a shitty contemporary piece of art from today?
It's like a mutilated anus.
Yeah. Well, this is from a guy named Antoine Pevsner, and this guy was making art in the shadow of the Russian Revolution. This is from the first 5 years of the Soviet Union.
So it's the same shit. Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yep. Crappy art. Jesus.
Like I said, we're finally starting to answer the question directly of how art got ugly, and here you go. Here's one piece of the puzzle right here.
It's the fucking Soviets.
It's the fact that our current intellectuals fetishize the Soviets, and those are the people on the arts boards and the people doling out the cultural grants. But yes, this is not Soviet in a disparaging sense of the word. This is literally the art from the first 5 years of the Soviet Union. He had a brother named Namgabo. I think that was a pseudonym. Here's something he did.
These people are on drugs.
Yeah.
It's like Scrimshaw.
Here's another thing that he did.
That's awful. You should just be freaking.
Again, we're starting to answer some questions. You want to know where the absolutely hideous art installation comes from? You want to know where that idea comes from? There you go. Right here. And like I said, there is not a single idea that was not already beaten to death by 1923. All of this stuff was done before 1923.
Yeah, and this looks like some of the modern art from the early episodes.
So. That it does. It looks exactly like every hideous art installation that's supposed to have context and a message. And this is what we're going to be going over for the rest of the episode. For the first 5 years of the Soviet Union, it wasn't art unless it was made out of industrial refuse and looked like dog shit. But the post-revolutionary days, they were all about tearing down everything from the imperial, Tsarist regime and replacing it with something new and enlightened. And this is what you get when you want something new and enlightened, because this has a theory behind it. These are not sculptures, by the way. They are constructions.
The Golem of Prague.
This is a utopian project supported by people who need to do things differently to prove they're doing something.
And they need tax dollars.
Especially in the Soviet Union, yes. Now, again, to be very clear, this shit got real old real fast in Russia, and Stalin eventually had a thing or two to say about the people making this stuff. Frequently, that thing he had to say was, "You're going to the Gulag." But the early Soviet Union, it was still the pet project of Western intellectuals. And like I said, to this day, they won't say a bad word about any of this stuff because this is the early Soviet project, and the early Soviet project works on paper.
It's their sacred scripture. Or this is their "Don't Draw Muhammad."
Yeah, that's actually a really good analogy for this. I didn't even think about that, but yeah, that's a really good way to put this. Intellectuals have never been willing to say that the emperor has no clothes when it comes to constructivists, but replacing sculptures with constructions, it was the most needless and pointless development in the history of art, and the arbiters of taste at the Museum of Modern Art won't get rid of it. And it permeates everything from brutalist architecture to those ugly sculptures we've been making fun of all series. Constructivism, it's just a barnacle on the ass of our culture, to the point where when you do arts and crafts with 6-year-olds, you make them out of construction paper. Again, that's fine for a hobby with your kids, but maybe not for remaking all of society.
Yeah. At a certain point, you gotta scale up a bit.
Yeah, so and if you stop listening to the series here and you don't want to hear the rest of the story, the TLDR, it's just easier for Western academics to destroy all of art than to admit there was anything bad about this stuff. So starting here, and especially after World War II, that's when art critics and even art instructors really start to gaze at their navels. Starting in early Soviet Russia, everything has to be connected to Marxist theory. Like, it's not even good enough to say we're getting rid of all the old stuff like aristocracy, tradition, art that doesn't look like garbage. Now you need to justify how your completely new way of doing things is actually contributing to the revolution, even though the revolution keeps changing and is only ever understood by a bunch of spurgs like Lenin and Trotsky. There are multiple manifestos from the Russian avant-garde in the first few years of the Soviet Union, and they all talk about the collective man who has given himself up for being one with the mass. Do they believe it? Who gives a shit? They're all pigs at the trough looking for state commissions. A couple episodes ago, we looked at Looking Backward, which is the proto-science fiction novel that got famous in the 1890s about the United States becoming one gigantic corporation where everybody has a dental plan and a pension, and it became the most popular book in America, and really the Marvel movie of its day.
Okay.
And that book became the template for the Soviet Union, and any American who was a fan of that book could not say a bad word about communist Russia. So that's the first thing. So that's the next thing to understand about Soviet constructivism. It's fan fiction for American Puritans.
The Kirk/Spock.
Yeah, basically. If you don't know what we're talking about,
God bless you.
yeah, please don't look it up.
No.
Especially don't at work, but just don't.
You will not get nice things.
Also, never date a girl who knows anything about this stuff.
Yeah.
I made that mistake in my 20s. Never again.
Yeah, if she knows about that, she's on some websites. And you're going to get some interesting targeted ads.
Oh, especially in the age of things being AI generated. So, admitting that the Soviet Union wasn't working and admitting that their pop culture-based intellectualizing doesn't work in the real world, that's anathema to American Puritans. The other group who have hearts in their eyes when they look towards the Soviet Union are the Reform Jews who had assimilated into New York in the late 19th century. And how did they do it? They did it by becoming more Puritan than the Puritans. That's how they... I don't even say this is a bad thing about the tribe, but that's how they blend in so well. They are more like the native people than the native people are. The Reformed Jews, the Puritans, they saw the Soviet Union through rose-colored glasses right up until the late 30s, when Stalin said, American intellectuals are so stupid and out of touch, they will never see it coming if I negotiate a pact with Hitler, which he did.
Yep.
And the modern equivalent of that is the rich girl with a Tumblr in 2013 who was writing fan fiction and insisting that we uplift minority voices, only to be shocked to discover that Kanye West has fairly standard opinions on the Jews for a black guy.
Yeah, I was going to say, when this started, I was like, you guys have never got your hair cut in a black barbershop.
Yeah.
How do you know? Because you want to uplift minority voices.
Yep. Yeah, or maybe like the girl with a gender studies degree who feels personally slighted when her classmate detransitions. You know, that's the kind of people who are not just looking at the Soviet Union with rose-colored glasses, but writing, great puff pieces about Uncle Stalin. But until Stalin signed that pact with Hitler, the Soviet Union could live safely in the knowledge that there was nothing that they could do, up to and including starving 7 million Ukrainians, to make the broadly defined American intellectual class say a bad word about them. I said a couple of episodes ago that I think that our world was more or less set in stone in 1925. Fascism was the bad guy in 1925. Fascism still defines the shadowy enemy in politics. The pursuit of efficiency was the main goal in business in 1925. The pursuit of efficiency still defines business ethics in 2025.
How else to get growth?
Yeah, well, the modern intellectual is still somebody who believes those first few years of the Soviet Union were a noble endeavor. And like I said, Lenin died in 1924, so you would be hard-pressed to find a Western-educated liberal arts professor who has a bad word to say about the Lenin years.
Yeah, they always have taken a lot of courses at the different institutions, and they're always a weird soft spot for Lenin.
Mm-hmm. And this art is part of it. They don't tell you that, but it is. These shitty art installations that pollute our landscape come from the exact same place as that soft spot for Lenin.
Yeah, you should stop giving these people grants to do this.
Should stop giving them food.
Then it would be what they wanted. It'd be, it's real communism. They're not eating.
No, their opinion of real communism is they should eat because they're getting fed out of the excess from the factories. As always, though, when you look at the real story, it doesn't quite match up with the narrative. And the narrative is that Lenin died, Stalin came in and replaced all this intellectual constructivism with vulgar propaganda paintings of himself. The truth is that even before Lenin died, constructivism was being phased out. The Russian Civil War, it went on from 1917 to 1922, and Lenin had bigger fish to fry than deciding that this artistic theory was more retarded than that artistic theory. So he was happy to let a bunch of these emo kids with a chip on their shoulder desecrate Russia's proud cultural tradition. But once the Mensheviks had been dealt with, Lenin was like, oh fuck, we actually have to run an economy. And we are trying to propagandize gopniks with this artsy-fartsy shit. No, that's not going to work.
Gopniks will not die for this weird crap company.
So he said, no, we need to get rid of the spare parts from Home Depot and start doing real paintings again. But the academic crowd, they have never let the true story get in the way of their moralizing soapbox speeches. And as far as they're concerned, constructivism, it's just the voice of the masses in the factories breaking free from the yoke of Tsar Nicholas until Stalin came along and screwed up the whole experiment. Here's a couple more constructivist pieces.
Like discarded tools.
That's exactly what I mean. It looks like refuse from Home Depot.
It's like something you use to break into a car.
Like I said, it's not good enough to make something that looks like it was built by the nerd who was forced to take shop class.
Yeah.
Everything needs to be accompanied by a theory about how this art is going to further the communist revolution, and a lot of these theories are just as ridiculous as you'd expect. It's Russia, so, you know, all they can afford is a few hunks of scrap metal, as you can see here. But they talk about how this industrial material means it's the art of the worker as he builds a new future. That is literally the theory behind this stuff. Not making it up.
It's as dumb as you would imagine.
Yes, it is. As dumb as you would imagine in 1918, as dumb as you'd imagine in 2025, because it's the same theory behind it.
I would think special people did this.
The thing, though, is if you listen to art history lectures on YouTube told by real professors, they still talk about this stuff like it was the art of the worker in the factory. Again, the narrative hasn't changed. The art history professor in the modern day sounds like Pravda.
Yep.
You know, your art is functional for the proletariat instead of luxurious for the bourgeoisie. And of course, because you're trying to impress a bunch of revolutionaries, your art is born out of revolution, so it helps further the dialectic. Because you have to mention the dialectic.
Yep.
This is not the Futurists, the Dadaists, the Blue Rider, or any other group since the Vienna Secession. This is not some middle-class group of kids writing a manifesto about how they have a new vision and how they're taking art away from the institutions and giving it to the people. This is a group of sycophants trying to get in the good graces of the bloodthirsty people who had just took over. And these theories are being written for the bureaucrats, the commissars, and the apparatchiks. A couple episodes ago, we showed an art installation at the Whitney Biennial that looked like the showroom of a cheap linoleum merchant made by an Asian girl with resting bitch face. It was accompanied by the most boilerplate drivel about challenging us to ask questions or some shit. In fact, let's remind ourselves of this.
Oh, God. It's a freaking showroom.
Yeah. Her artworks and installations evolve with time as she deliberately misuses a broad range of traditional media, including photography and aluminum casting. This is constructivism. This is no different than the stuff we looked at. Zero difference.
Same weird thing.
Yeah. I'm not saying it was inspired by it. I'm saying there is zero difference here.
Same thing.
Yeah. This sounds exactly like Soviet shit, and I'll even continue. She is interested in working with pre-existing forms and then trying to defamiliarize or deconstruct them. That is a sentence that would have been fresh as a daisy in 1921.
Yeah.
Draping what she described as tanned and unfixed sheets of light-sensitive film atop a scaffold of industrial steel joists, by exposing light-sensitive film to sunlight during the artworks installation, Kang encourages colors to emerge organically and reorganizes spaces, questioning what is retained and forgotten as we move through the world. So she even mentions the industrial joists at the top of this.
Yep.
That's how derivative and not original this stuff is.
It's off the shelf.
Yes. Well, we made fun of this in episode 2, and you know, I hadn't even gotten this far in my research. I was just making fun of it for being pretentious. I didn't realize how unoriginal it was, but I guess that's how unoriginal the whole art world is. I just picked a random pretentious art installation and it fit perfectly into the rest of the story.
Yep.
You know, we asked what was the fucking point? Well, now we know what the fucking point is. The point is that it's constructivism. The point is that in 1921, everybody fetishized the Soviet Union. In 1921, you had to do this shit to get a commission from the Bolsheviks. And even though the Bolsheviks were already done with this kind of shit by the time Lenin had croaked, we live in a culture that is so devoid of any genuine cultural progress since about 1925 that our decadent intellectual class is still going through the exact same motions.
Yeah. Like a lark.
So to get status, some kid from a soulless Korean striver family is going to write a half-assed blurb about how it's contributing to progress by hanging exposed film from the ceiling. In reality, all I see with that blurb is I'm ashamed to my family because I can't do math, but I'm female and a visible minority, so I'm eligible for art grants.
Yep.
But
you see our installation. I see daughter who is not doctor or lawyer. You hear me? You hear me, Wallace? Even as the girl, you don't play violin.
Dad, I do play the violin. Not well enough.
You play violin like shit. Now you hang up. This needs to be back in my linoleum warehouse.
Oh, I make you cry? Let me play World's Finest Violin for you. Oh, wait, nobody here play good violin.
These linoleum samples have to be back in my warehouse, Lois. I got buyer coming in the morning. You know where I don't have to do this? If you're a doctor. You think I have to come to a doctor's office with the linoleum strip? I was so close to being happy. You always been lazy. Lois!
Now, for those of you listening, in case you think we are being too hard on this woman, oh, she's going to come back later in this episode, so this isn't even finished yet.
You know.
So,
she's going to Google. She's going to Google her own name. She's going to find this. And then she's going to, like, get really into Stop Asian Hate.
I just say, like, you can't find a single pretentious art critic who says that every constructivist art installation looks like a jerry-rigged contraption in a redneck's garage, but that's what this looks like.
Yeah. like someone's about to start cooking meth or something.
Yeah. To say a bad word about constructivism, it's like saying a bad word about Martin Luther King or Nelson Mandela. There's just too many intellectuals who draw their validation from the Disney version of history to do that. From here on out, we have this new idea of art, which is not meant to be anything but a purely destructive part of the communist revolution, as long as it has a context or a theory attached to it. And now you see why we've had to spend so much time laying everything out. Because these theories, they harken back to everything we've spoken about since episode 1. Contemporary artists will talk about how, by using industrial materials, they're actually the intellectual heirs to Vasari and Reynolds. You didn't see my colleague here roll his eyes when I said that.
Freaking hit me in the top of the head.
Yeah. It's going to be pointless, convoluted, and self-referential when they talk like this, but you know what? Pointless, convoluted, and self-referential applies to most facets of contemporary art. What exactly is the theory behind constructivism? Is it the voice of the Russian peasantry, like the art professors like to say? Is it the voice of these gopniks crying out for freedom from Tsarist rule? Oh God, no. It sees itself as the heir apparent to two pieces of architecture, and the first is this one. This is the Crystal Palace. It was designed by Joseph Paxton for the Great Exhibition of 1851 in London. Now, it's always difficult to figure out the cut of Britain's cultural jib. We think of England as being a place that's almost autistic about its record keeping and historical preservation, especially when it comes to architecture and old buildings. The joke is that Americans see English people as stoic, prim and proper Mary Poppins types who love Shakespeare, while Europeans see the English as a bunch of fat-ass tourists who travel to the Mediterranean and spend the day at the bar getting drunk with other English tourists.
Watching the footy.
Then they get drunk, pick a fight, and pass out in the street.
Wearing their fucking Man U shirts.
Fighting with other people wearing Man U shirts. Didn't you say that every bouncer you knew who was British had been stabbed?
Every bouncer I knew from the British Isles had a stab wound, usually on his face. I'm not exaggerating. This isn't that most of them did. This isn't hyperbole. 100% of the British bouncers that I worked with, who came over here and worked as bouncers, had stab wounds. See, in Canada, we've got like that, like American gun culture without as many guns. In Britain, it's like, you know, gun for show, knife for a pro. They got a stabbing culture, so.
And they got the NHS. I think Bill Hicks did a bit on that. Americans are less willing to get into bar fights because they just think about the medical bill at the end of it.
Yeah, I believe it.
So, yeah, it's easy to forget that there's always been this radical streak in England. They were having a civil war, and their fanatics were beheading the king 150 years before the French got around to doing it. In fact, large parts of English high society were excited to see the French Revolution kick off in 1789 because it was the exact 100-year anniversary of the Glorious Revolution that brought a Dutch guy in to head up a limited monarchy.
Shout out to William of Orange.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, save for like Edmund Burke and Jeremy Bentham and a few other people who wrote about how France was going to be a disaster, everybody thought it was just providential that this was happening on the 100-year anniversary, because God clearly wanted France to follow England's lead in this limited monarchy business. Didn't work out that way. But when we look at English art, we see the same outward-looking face of conservatism. We looked at the Georgian-era portraitists a few episodes ago. We looked at Constable and Turner having their feud within the academic environment. We looked at the Pre-Raphaelites, who were going to show how realistic and artistically detail-oriented they were. You know, you think of all the weird shit with the Impressionists and Van Gogh and the Fauvists and the Cubists. It wasn't all done by French people, because Van Gogh wasn't French, but at least it was all done in Paris. But just like that radical streak, the English art world is capable of pulling off the occasional surprise. And this structure here, which looks like a 20th century glass monstrosity of modern architecture, it comes out of London.
It's like One Good Rock. Would be
I'd say it's the bad rock.
Oh, but One Good Rock would be the end of this.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
It's like a train station.
Kind of, yeah. It's like a train station that you can hose off. This thing, it's built as the venue for the Great Exhibition of 1851, which was the first real World's Fair in the industrialized world, and certainly the first one of its size and scale. The first half of the 19th century had been a time of political upheaval across the continent, culminating in like 1848, when the whole continent went up in revolt and was all promptly put down for the most part. Britain never had anything quite on that level, even though it did have the Chartists in the 1830s, who were like the original Black Lives Matter movement. The intellectuals told them to be resentful of their position, and the poor people rioted in the streets, thinking that it was going to accomplish something. It didn't.
Never does.
No, it didn't. But for one reason or another, the mood changed overnight to optimism in the 1850s, and this event, the Great Exhibition, was emblematic of that. Kind of in the same way that Britain snapped out of its malaise in the 1980s by going to war with Argentina over a few islands full of sheep.
It was a good moment for the country.
Well, you know, another cause of optimism in the late 1840s was the defeat of the Sikhs in the Punjab.
Yep. That's a hard one win, man. You get a W over the Sikhs. You're doing pretty good.
As we may have to learn again in a few years here.
It's going to be an interesting Reconquista.
This is not the 20th century when left wing has almost a socialist or a communist connotation. This is the 19th century when left wing means you hate power being held by royalty and the Anglican Church. So left wing means supporting individualism, capitalism, free trade. By about the 1880s, when a lot of people can get rich enough to be self-sufficient, largely due to the mass production of steel, capitalism very much has a left-wing connotation. The Manchester School of Liberalism, the acolytes of laissez-faire capitalism at all costs, they're basically what we would now call libertarians. And they were Whigs. They were what you call left-wingers in the day. But it's the 1850s, and things are not quite as cut and dried as they will be in the 1880s. But in general, Whigs tend to be free trade supporters, and Tories tend to be protectionists. And there is a Whig government under John Russell at the time that this event happens. He wants to stage the Great Exhibition to show off the success of Britain's industrialism and the economy of the empire. So the first thing they need is a building to stage an event like that. And they recruit people like Isambard Kingdom Brunel, who is the guy who every steampunk dresses up as.
Okay.
They recruit him to come up with a design, but there's just not really an appetite for spending public money on a brick building that would be bigger than St. Peter's in the Vatican. Especially not for a one-time event. Like anybody who's ever lived in a city that has hosted the Olympics can tell you that those venues don't usually pay ongoing dividends. Sometimes they do, usually they don't.
Yeah, often because unless they're attached to something that's going to use those facilities, it's just a freaking hole.
They settle on a design for the venue by a man named Joseph Paxton, who had designed a bunch of greenhouses for the Duke of Devonshire, and they built this thing in Hyde Park. Now, this design is clearly more utilitarian than aesthetic, but more importantly, it's something new that the world has never seen before. There's never been anything that looked like this. 20th century architecture with its glass boxes, it has an odd fetishization of the Crystal Palace. People don't just want to be architects, they want to solve a grandiose challenge using materials that nobody's ever used before, and use words like functional or efficiency. That's what was done with this building.
Oh, so this is why we see all these glass monstrosities.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the Crystal Palace, it uses prefabricated components so that it can be rapidly assembled. It has 1 million square feet of glass so that it can make use of the natural light. It has a bunch of iron pillars, which means that it can be supported from the middle, not from the walls. And it uses lightweight materials, which means that it can be scaled up.
Okay.
The Crystal Palace was a huge contrast with the rest of mid-century Victorian architecture, which was either neoclassical or it was Gothic revival and still made use of traditional brick masonry.
Harry Potter looking stuff.
Exactly, yep. Personally, I don't see anything wrong with traditional masonry, especially because it feels less dystopian. But especially after the turn of the century, you have a lot of this pretentious academic talk about how masonry is needlessly conservative, so let's start building everything out of iron, glass, and anything else you can hose off.
How'd that work on 9/11, boys?
Yep. But that's where the New Jerusalem aesthetic in that video game I showed you came from.
The green with the crystal.
Yeah, exactly. It was very much inspired by the Crystal Palace, even if the people who programmed it didn't realize it. The building's 1,851 feet long because the event was staged in 1851. And as an interesting piece of trivia, which may come up at a pub quiz or something, if you want to talk about the functionality of architecture, this is the first ever building with public flush toilets.
Oh, okay.
Just a piece of trivia. Yeah. Now, like I said, I was going to leave my roasting of Lotus Kang where it was before.
Lotus!
But I found another article written about this woman, and it is so relevant to this discussion of the Crystal Palace that I just can't not bring it up.
It's by her father.
No, it's a puff piece. It's not by her
It's by
father.
her father. It's entitled, "Why Are You Not a Doctor?"
Lotus, if you're watching, why aren't you a doctor?
Yeah. Come on, Lotus, get your shit together. Think about how hard your parents worked.
Funny thing, I don't want to dox anybody too much, but in this article they talked about her studio apartment in New York, and she lives very close to where your brother lives.
Oh, great.
So let's
Very fashionable neighborhood.
let's take a look at Lotus Gang. Now, is this not the face of a woman who smashes stereotypes? She has the face of a doctor who can tell you you have cancer.
Yep, she does. Lois, you are bred for a big doctor. You're not bred. Shaming the family.
You know what? I'd rather you hang up your medical degree.
How about we do that? We hang up your brother and sister degrees. And maybe you get the message. How I explain this to family in Asia. You know how this sounds?
So, to spoil the article, she doesn't even have a new idea. She's now just exposing the film within greenhouses.
Oh, great.
Now,
I wonder why she had a greenhouse.
I gotta read this. Also, I know that neighborhood in New York. You don't live there on an artist's salary. She has a white boyfriend, is what I'm saying.
Oh,
They
always do.
I know. Who else is going to enable them?
Yeah.
I'm going to read some of Lotus Kang's wisdom from this article.
Oh, God.
Greenhouses are neither entirely outdoors nor indoors. Their steel armatures and polycarbonate walls make them artificial, yet their contents are organic. I know that something's organic within there.
I'm smelling something distinctly organic.
But that's exactly what they said about the Crystal Palace. That was inspired by greenhouses, and it was the 1850s. And I just have to read this part of the article, because I honestly can't tell if it was written by ChatGPT or not.
Yeah, I was going to say, this could be like AI thing.
Kang wonders whether greenhouses could also be diasporic vessels. Placeless and liminal, they share qualities she associates with diasporic experience. Born in Toronto to Korean parents and now based in New York, Kang's practice often draws from her family history, as well as from the histories of colonization and imperialism in Asia. You have to mention colonization.
And like, when I talk to Asians and you bring up colonization, they're talking about the Japanese. Mm-hmm. They're not talking about...
Sometimes proudly.
Yeah.
Yet rather than work autobiographically or with recognizable cultural symbols, she prefers to denature identity into the material processes and physical choreography of her installations. Even when her references are personal or historical, they are often so abstracted. There's another one of these buzzwords, abstraction. They are often so abstracted that they are alienated or torqued from their roots. I'm doing diaspora rather than showing it, Kang tells me. I'm inhabiting a state of in-between.
So you have a white boyfriend?
Yeah. Hold that thought on inhabiting a state of being in between, because that's even going to come back later. Just to show you just how, like, a complete lack of creativity there is here. So just put a pin in that one. Just like I said, as we're going to see for the remainder of this episode, every single word of that article could have been written by an early Soviet artist trying to argue to the party higher-ups that he should get to be the chief propagandist. Like, it hits the word imperialism.
Yep.
It hits the word experience. Mm-hmm. It talks about denaturing identity into the material process, which is almost a direct translation of a phrase in Rodchenko's manifesto, which we'll be looking at shortly. It talks about a diaspora, which is a synonym for internationalism, which was a huge Soviet buzzword. Mm-hmm. And inhabiting a space of in-between is something that weirdly shows up in a lot of these Soviet theories. Weirdly. when Elisitsky talks about his prouns, which we'll talk about as well, he basically says this pile of scrap metal, it's not painting, it's not architecture, it inhabits a space of in-between.
They love ambiguity.
Yep. Well, just in case you needed any additional proof that modern art is for the validation of people with degrees. It's not for the rest of us. It's not to uplift anybody. It's to validate. Anyways, here's Lotus Kang's art installation.
Lotus! You make all the best in my greenhouse. How am I gonna grow tomato? You are an ending source of disappointment.
Look, all that unused space. Can I at least fill it with other waste of space art?
I work 18-hour day at dry cleanup. And I come home to this mess. Leave your shit lying around the greenhouse. This is not a hotel, Lotus.
Every time I have to dry clean a doctor's white coat, I remind him how disappointed I am. Anyway, all right, enough of that. Back to the Crystal Palace.
Yeah, it's like the video game.
Yeah. So, exactly, that's the point I'm trying to make. Yeah, when the exhibition is held, all of the world's best manufactured goods are on display for 5 months, and it's an unprecedented show of just how much stuff can be in one location.
This puts a trade show.
Basically, yes.
Jeez.
It's not just the manufactured goods, though. It's also a way to showcase the raw materials from the colonies, like wool from Australia, fur from Canada, cotton from India, cotton from other places, and all sorts of exotic textiles. And also on display was the Kohinoor diamond, which was won from the Sikhs in the Punjab a couple of years earlier. They also had shilling days with cheap admission so that the British person working in the factory could see just how much ass Britain was kicking in the world. I'm not afraid of being a child of the British Empire. Nobody's going to tell me the colonialism was a bad thing.
Yeah, long live, fucking Pax Britannia.
Yeah. But this is not just some weird Jetsons story about a utopian future. This is now. This is the present. This is the world that these people lived in.
It looks also, now that I'm looking at it, like Star Trek or Babylon 5.
Yeah, I can see that too. Yeah.
Kind of weird mix of kind of smooth and utopian and green and
Yeah. So it's easy to find things that praise the Crystal Palace in its day, not least because you can find all sorts of propaganda. And even from our perch in the 21st century, it's easy to say, fine, we took the idea of the glass box too far, but this was a cool idea at the time. But this is radio-free history. We are calling bullshit when it needs to be called, and it's rather interesting to see who the list of detractors were at the time when this was happening. First, you have William Morris. We mentioned his contemporary, Edward Bellamy. He was the guy who wrote Looking Backward, the utopian science fiction novel about the United States becoming a corporation, becoming a utopia with no need for money and perfect gender equality and universal education, and a population spending all its spare time on intellectual pursuits so that nobody commits crimes. Yeah, American utopianism has not changed.
yeah, Roddenberry,
Yep.
Jetsons, right?
Now, that was 1888. That was 1888, so a few decades after the Crystal Palace was built. But it was followed up the next year by another science fiction novel by William Morris called News from Nowhere, which was an equally utopian vision, but a very different one. The place is called Nowhere, which literally means utopia. And it's about an egalitarian society in the British countryside where everybody's Bilbo Baggins, living in the Shire, producing what his neighbors need. So it's a pastoral society, not an industrial society. Looking Backwards had people punching the clock at the factory, but then News from Nowhere, everybody thinks his work is enjoyable, so there's no drudgery at all. Most importantly, in Nowhere, the architecture is quaint and beautiful, as opposed to this gray concrete jungle in Bellamy's world. So you see the exact same dichotomy that you see 40 years later with Huxley and Tolkien. And Morris would have described himself as a socialist or even a communist, but he's more like the crazy hippie who moves to California and lives in the woods. Somewhat fittingly, he spends his life forming a craft furniture company, designing things like handmade wallpaper, so he's not into the whole machine age thing. But he wrote that book as an old man in the 1890s. What was his opinion of the Crystal Palace in 1851 when he was a teenager? First of all, he refused to go, saying the whole thing offended his idea of good taste. He called the Crystal Palace woefully ugly, and in some of his diaries and letters, he talked about the vulgarity of the whole spectacle. Yeah. They had a way of saying things in the British Victorian era. The vulgarity of the whole spectacle. What about John Ruskin? And this is where we're going to really start calling back to some of our previous episodes. Ruskin was the main art critic of his day. He was the reason why the Pre-Raphaelites became the dominant art movement in the mid-19th century. That was with, Millais doing the photorealistic painting of Ophelia drowning in the river with every flower mentioned in the text, where he made sure to include that in the picture. It was that spurred. Whatever can be said of 20th century art, it certainly did not follow in that autistic tradition. But in the 1850s, at the height of Ruskin's influence, he was the guy who could make or break your career as an artist, especially an artist who was trying something new and different. He was the Harvey Weinstein who could give a chance to Quentin Tarantino.
The King of Spain, who finally sending this fucking dipshit
Columbus. Yep. Yeah, exactly. That's another good example. And what did he think of the Crystal Palace? He said it was cold and unfeeling, lacking in organic and moral quality. Part of the reason that the Victorian era had the Gothic revival was that he wrote a piece called The Stones of Venice, where he praised the craftsmanship and moral integrity of Gothic architecture, contrasting it with the Crystal Palace, which he called lifeless. He said it was a lifeless symbol of industrial hubris and a symbol of the degradation of architecture. And also, he wrote a pamphlet explicitly about the Crystal Palace, calling it a glass house, focused on spectacle, saying it was perhaps the only building in the world in which the constructive power of the material is entirely triumphant over every condition of form and space. Modern architects say this stuff is a brag.
Yeah.
In various letters, Ruskin calls the Crystal Palace vulgar, mechanical, and said it had a cucumber frame. Now, what about the leading architect of the Gothic revival that we just mentioned? His name was Augustus Pugin, I don't know how you pronounce it. He was actually involved in the exhibition, designing one of the courts. And it was notable because his court was full of a bunch of handcrafted objects in a sea of manufactured goods. He was proud of his contribution in some letters, but he also called the palace a glass monster and wrote a pamphlet saying that the industrial aesthetic overshadowed spirituality and artistry. Now, a few years later, this Crystal Palace was relocated to Sydenham and was visited by two people who were in the crosshairs of the radical Soviet revolutionaries, Leo Tolstoy and Fyodor Dostoevsky. What did they have to say about it? Tolstoy, he visited in 1861, saying it was a soulless display of wealth. And more importantly, Dostoevsky visited the next year in 1862, and he said it was something out of Babylon and a fantasy of a society where individuality was sacrificed for efficiency and progress. He wrote a novel called Notes from Underground in 1864, where he talks about the Crystal Palace as a metaphor for the West's hyper-rational obsession with progress. You know, like I said, the New Jerusalem idea, it kind of requires us airbrushing all this stuff out of the past.
I'm always very curious about other cultures' opinions of Western culture and my culture. That's always fascinating.
Yeah. It's interesting that no academic dares to say a bad word about the constructivists, but the constructivists see themselves as the heir apparent to the Crystal Palace, so most of them don't say a bad word about this thing either. You know, the Crystal Palace, it's a symbol of all this industrial wealth that the Soviets and the fanboys of looking backwards are going to use to achieve their utopian pipe dreams. But I said that there were two buildings that were the antecedents of Russian constructivism. And the second one is also unveiled as part of a World Fair in 1889, so 38 years after the Crystal Palace, and it's a little more recognizable.
Oh, yeah. I've been in this.
Yeah, the Eiffel Tower, it's also a symbol of technological optimism, and once again, it's made out of industrial material without any ornamentation. It also has a utilitarian purpose. Like it's supposed to be a platform for doing experiments and for radio transmission.
Every level you go up, you got to pay a little more.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just like the Crystal Palace, though, again, at the time, there were also detractors. There were people who said, I don't care how progressive it is, it's hideous. I don't care how progressive it is hideous. Famously, Guy de Maupassant, he called it a monstrous iron scaffolding, a soulless monument to industrial hubris, and an eyesore on the Paris skyline. At one point, he said he was going to eat a meal at the Eiffel Tower's restaurant because it's the only place where he doesn't have to look at the Eiffel Tower.
The same criticism has been lodged at the CN Tower in
Yeah.
Toronto. So.
Yep. Which is also a very utilitarian building.
Yeah. Thank you, Cold War.
So another famous detractor of the Eiffel Tower is poet Paul Verlaine, who called it the grotesque skeleton of progress.
Yeah, he called it.
So both the Crystal Palace and the Eiffel Tower, they're called hideous and dehumanizing by their detractors. But when the 20th century modern architects come along, all you see are theories asking, why the fuck did the Europeans wait so long between the Crystal Palace and the Eiffel Tower? They had everything figured out the first time. We need more of these efficient metal and glass monstrosities. And that brings us to constructivism. What do you think that is?
That is a trust fund and a disappointed set of parents.
Oh no, this is the opposite. This is Russia. This guy is dirt poor. This is all he can afford.
Okay, yeah, this is Borat's fucking Venus de Milo.
Yeah, no, this is best described as a masterpiece of scraping by.
Yeah. Something a hobo might cobble together.
Yeah, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade, and when you're a Russian avant-garde artist, life gives you rusty wires, splintered wood, and industrial scraps.
He's old, he called me a
Well, the thing is, this is pre-Russian Revolution, so the artist doesn't even have an excuse.
Yeah.
So what's the story behind this thing? This is done by a guy named Vladimir Tatlin. Now, we don't actually know that much about his early life, but at some point he ends up in Moscow and goes to art school and lives with his uncle making Orthodox religious icons, like the stuff that Russians keep in the corner of their house and pray to. And once again, we have to call back to a previous episode, in this case, the 20th century episode, because when you're talking about avant-garde art between 1900 and 1914, the years are important. There's just so few of these people across Europe that you can pinpoint exactly the moment when two of them meet up and one starts emulating the style of each other.
Okay.
Tatlin went to Paris in 1913, and he met Picasso. Now remember, Picasso had done all of his Cubist stuff in 1910 and 1911. From 1912 onward, every avant-garde hipster in Paris was trying his hand at analytical cubism. But Picasso had moved on to something new, something which he called synthetic cubism. As always, the sequel's never as good as the original. He's really just pasting random things onto the canvas, like so.
Oh, okay.
One of his more famous synthetic cubist works is called Still Life with Chair Caning, where he pasted a tablecloth that looked like rattan chair weaving onto a canvas and called it mixed media.
Jesus Christ. At least he wasn't painting though, Chris.
Yeah, good for you, buddy.
Way to go.
Tatlin meets Picasso when he visits Paris. He sees this stuff, and I'm just imagining a retarded child, because he goes back to Moscow and says, "You will not believe what I saw in Paris." And he decides to start sticking wood and wire to a wall, calling it a counter relief. Now, a relief is the thing on the left.
Yeah.
A relief is a sculpture that projects out of the wall. A counter relief is whatever the fuck this thing is on the right. If we're going to get to the bottom of how art got ugly, we need to figure out how the word sculpture is used to encompass both like Bernini's Ecstasy of St. Teresa and a banana duct taped to the wall, and I think this is right where the train starts going off the track.
Yeah, see, it's Borat's freaking idea. Like, if you point a gun at a peasant and say, make art, in like a ruined landscape, it's probably what they're going to come up with. So I guess it makes sense.
I'm just saying, this is the part of the detective novel where the sleuth uncovers a critical clue. Because the communist revolution is the exact moment when people say that the one on the right is actually the more intellectual and progressive one.
Oh, God. What a horrible...
Now, we don't actually know what was going on in Totland's head because he doesn't have a manifesto, and quite frankly, he's just an alcoholic gopnik.
Yep.
But at one point, a couple years after the revolution, he gives a lecture talking about 3 dimensions because it matches machines and organizes materials in space. I'm sure somebody else wrote that speech for him. Most likely the art critic Nikolai Punin, who comes up with all of this academic nonsense about how this shit is innovative and how it shifts representational art to abstract and material-driven forms.
Jesus.
He talks about how it breaks the plane and enters the 3rd dimension, and how it's not just perspective, it's art that actually takes up space. Yeah, Stalin is going to come to power and make sure that Punin dies in a gulag.
They're still doing this stuff. Like, you think about, like, I remember a few years ago with the all-girl Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
There were, like, serious people being like, this was a very funny movie.
Mm-hmm. Again, Punin got sent to the gulag. I'd be fine with it if we sent these critics to the gulag. Yeah, it's an episode of South Park where the adults are like amazed by something mundane, and the kids are like, "Mom, Dad, it's just a piece of rust.
Yeah.
It's just a wire tied to the wall."
He's fooling you guys.
Yeah, like I said, after the death of Stalin, Punin's writings are uncovered, and Western academics just think they're the most profound and brilliant things ever. And every lecture I could find on constructivism described the counter-relief in exactly the same terms that Punin described them. As if they're brilliant in their use of 3 dimensions. Just look at the thing on the right. Is that brilliant in its use of 3 dimensions? No, it's not. It's a bunch of fucking moldy lumber scraps strung between 2 walls. That's what I see.
It's a horrible thing. Looks like something an orc would make, and I guess that's kind of fitting.
Well, as for Totland, sometimes you're in the right place at the right time, and when the revolution happens in 1917, the Bolsheviks just love this retarded Gopnik and think he would be the perfect face of the new revolutionary art. And Bilo the town retard becomes head of the Moscow branch of the visual arts section of the People's Commissariat for Enlightenment. And what comes out of it? This thing.
Oh. They just gave Milo a big budget.
Well, I should say this model, because this never actually gets built. This is supposed to be a building that he designs, which is supposed to be built. This is just the model.
That's efficient. I'd love to fucking shovel that thing in their fucking 8-month-long winters.
Well, see, this is another fixture of the modern era, though. The architect who never actually gets his stuff built.
Oh.
It's supposed to be the follow-up to the Eiffel Tower. It's supposed to be Crystal Palace, Eiffel Tower, this thing. That's literally how these theories are talking about it in the day. The model is famous enough. It's 20 feet tall. It's erected in St. Petersburg for a year. The one on the right is the actual picture of the model. This is a reconstruction of it on the left. Because, again, our academics love early age communist shit. This is supposed to be a building that's 130 stories tall, housing all of the important party organs. like where Comrade Lenin is supposed to do his important work, I guess.
It already looked like 9/11. What will terrorists do, comrade? They will come to crash plane, and it will just be, oh, someone already crashed plane. Praise be to our religion of peace.
You disappoint the revolutionaries as much as Lotus Gang would disappoint our parents.
Lotus, it's not too late. You can go back to school. You can make your dad proud.
I have been to the neighborhood you live in, Lotus. I know your boyfriend works in finance. He can pay for your medical degree. This ridiculous model is where the pretentious utopian thinking collides with reality. There's 4 cylinders inside this thing, and they're all supposed to rotate. Like the bottom one is supposed to rotate, once every year. Then the second one is supposed to rotate 1 time a month, then 1 time a week, and 1 time a day, because of course.
It's so on its face stupid.
Yeah, well, that's how profound these theories are. It moves, therefore it's revolutionary, therefore it's anti-imperialism. And just because that's not enough. You see those like diagonal ramps spiraling around the outside? I'm not making this up. This is supposed to be for party officials on motorcycles to rapidly speed up to the top, grab an important message from Comrade Stalin, drive back down and deliver it somewhere else. But like, who cares? It's not getting built.
They would make the Gopnik go up there in the snow with the motorcycle, and they wouldn't have like shoveled.
Oh yeah, a bunch of them would fall off, and Comrade Stalin, he'd make a sacrifice to the revolution. Go get next Gopnik.
It'd be like an Aztec temple.
Can you imagine if the current leader of Russia had so little regard for the life of Gopniks?
I'm just glad that that's not the world we live in. I'm glad that the autocrat of Russia and the ruling class of Russia just don't feel entitled to just kill every poor person in the whole fucking country to make a point.
He's like breeding new poor people just to kill them.
It's their fucking birthright. The ruling class, the Muscovite ruling class, see it as their birthright to send all the poor people to die if they need it. Nothing's changed in that country. The same culture that the Tsar had, it's fucking just different, justification for the same structures.
So I saw a lecture on YouTube by Charles Jenks, who is literally the guy who wrote the book on postmodern architecture. And he says that constructivist works always had 2 things, geometric shapes and diagonals. And the diagonals and spirals are supposed to represent the Marxist dialectic of history, being substructures coming into conflict with superstructures and producing something new. So Greek city-states clash with slaves, and the dialectic gives us feudalism, and yada, yada, yada. So the current stage of the dialectic is between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, and eventually real communism is going to be reached. And they believe it's just a scientific fact that humans are going to reach communism. I'm going to say that I want to see the experiment repeated a bunch of times before I call it scientific, because that's how the scientific method works. But again, according to this guy, these diagonals and the spirals and the zigzags, they're supposed to represent the dialectic moving in generally the right direction, but sometimes veering off course. Now, I have not been able to find a primary source from the 20s that confirms this, so it may just be a pretentious academic talking out his ass, but it's also no less ridiculous than the actual theories from the time, so why the fuck not? Let's believe it. Let's go with it. There were multiple official manifestos of constructivism, one of which was written by Tatlin's contemporary Alexander Rodchenko in 1922, the program of the first working group of constructivists. It's a short manifesto, but every word of it is ridiculous. He talks about synthesizing communist theory with artistic formalism. He says that the sole ideology behind constructivism is going to be scientific communism, and that certain principles are going to be applied to make sure everything is scientific. Yeah, sure.
Trust the experts.
If this comes from the actual manifesto, is it that ridiculous to believe that the motorcycle ramp up the side of a 400-meter building represents the dialectic? I don't know.
Once you're in that, like that, the land of the mental midget.
Yeah.
It's like Alice in Wonderland. A lot of things that don't make sense end up making sense.
Rodchenko says that constructivism is going to be based on 3 principles. And unless I'm reading a bad translation, I swear I am not making this up to be funny. The first principle is tectonica, tempered and formed from the properties of communism and industrial material, creating unity of practical design from the relationship of ideological to formal. Can you tell me what a word of that even means?
No.
I can't either. The second principle is factura, which is the organic state of the work material. So in other words, if something is a chunk of metal, it needs to make use of the fact that it's a chunk of metal, like Chekhov's gun shit. There's a sentence which I have tried to find other books and experts to explain, but as best as I can tell, this is a true word salad. Again, assuming my translation is accurate. Therefore, the group considers that factura is material consciously worked and expediently used without hampering the construction or restricting the tectonica. So I guess that means use a chunk of iron, but don't use it in a way that interferes with the communism?
This is something you see in totalitarian regimes. When Hitler came to power, there was all of a sudden there had to be like National Socialist math.
Yeah, the German cat. Famously, there was an article about the German cat, about why German cats have better genetics than other cats.
Just that becomes the playbook for everything.
Yep. Oh, well, when we get to the 1930s, that's when you're going to see the true final form of propaganda.
It's like your buddy who's on like the drugs, and then he finds Jesus, and then every problem's like Jesus.
Yep. Every problem in the 30s is throw a picture of stuff.
Yep.
How does that solve the problem? I don't go to Gulag. The third principle is the actual construction, which is the process of organizational function between tectonica and factura. I don't know what the fuck this means, and I've tried to find somebody to explain it to me. And of course, every manifesto has to contain a call to action, and again, I'm reading this verbatim, and it is just as ridiculous as it sounds. Here's their call to action: to prove theoretically and practically the incompatibility of aesthetic activity with the functions of intellectual and material production, to have real participation of intellectual and material production as an equal element in the creation of a communist culture, and of course, in the agitational sphere, to fight an uncompromising war on art and the unacceptable artistic culture of the past. Now, he wasn't sent to the Gulag, but when Comrade Stalin said, "Enough of this bullshit, you're painting portraits of me now," Rodchenko was forced to publicly denounce every word of this stuff.
It's a good communist.
But when Lotus Kang talked about denaturing identity into the material process, she was trying to sound really intelligent and pretentious. She is literally talking about tectonic and factura.
Lotus!
Yeah,
You plagiarized this book?
Yes, she did. I guarantee you she did. She thought that nobody was going to read this outside of her stupid art history classes that she took at art school. Sorry, darling, you live in the age of the YouTube autistic spurg, and I'm one of them.
Notice, I have to hear from nerds on the internet that you lie, you plagiarize all your crap.
Yeah, you do.
It's not even original.
You do, Mr. King.
You ruined my film sample. How am I going to sell film now?
Now, to be clear about Rodchenko, he's not Tatlin. Tatlin's just below the town retard. Rodchenko is talented, both as an artist and in terms of always being able to write bullshit to justify how his work was in line with the communist academic fad of the week. But he can deliver the goods. And some people say he's the father of modern graphic design. He certainly is the father of the Soviet aesthetic. You've probably seen this poster.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
It's a famous one. Like I said, it certainly defined the Soviet aesthetic. Did it define graphic design? Maybe, but there's a couple of caveats. First of all, we talked about Toulouse-Lautrec a few episodes ago, doing things in the 1890s, like figuring out how to use a toothbrush to create speckling. I'm not sure Rodchenko did anything as original as that. And second of all, I went to high school in the 2000s when every slightly creative autistic person was into Photoshop and like making movie posters for fun, which would rival actual Hollywood advertising material. Those people were able to do anything with the computers in their bedrooms, and I don't think they came up with anything that really looked radically different than this. So maybe there's just a limit to what you can do with a propaganda poster, and he was just the first to do it. I don't know. He was doing it in the 20s when printing technology had matured. But I will say in his defense, Photoshop did not exist in 1923. He is designing this stuff by hand, physically cutting out the letters. It looks clean and professional, so I'm not mocking his technical skills. I'm just mocking his retarded theories about art.
You know how many of her family we had to kill to get the model to pose properly?
Oh, this model is going to be part of our story later.
Oh, excellent.
Just to give you a little teaser of what's coming, she is a Jewish woman in an open marriage who hangs around the art community. So I'll let you make some predictions about how she plays a role in this story. So Rodchenko is in his early 20s when he goes to art school in the early 1910s. So he starts his career in that very brief period when the avant-garde is culturally relevant. And like Tatlin, this is another guy who's just in the right place at the right time when Lenin needs a useful idiot to talk about how the old ways of doing things are outdated and counter-revolutionary. Rodchenko, he's still making a name for himself in 1914-15 when the war breaks out. But if you've been following along and you have an autistic memory for dates, what's big in the avant-garde in the 1910s? Well, it's Cubism in Paris and Futurism in Italy. And in Moscow, the avant-garde is going to combine them into something they call Cubo-Futurism. One of the main figures is a man named Mikhail Larionov, who even tries to create a break-off movement of an already microscopic Moscow avant-garde. And he does things like this.
Okay. Oh, wow.
Yeah. What do you think this is?
It's an inside-out stained glass window.
So this is the 1920s where everyone is in cafes trying to sound intelligent by talking about Einstein and Heisenberg and the latest discoveries in physics, which they don't understand.
Can't do math.
Nope, they can't. Just like today.
Yep.
Yeah, the Cubists do it, the Dadaists do it, talking about Freud's psychoanalytical theories and like how modern physics means you see things from different perspectives. This guy does it as well. And Larionov says, and I shit you not, that this is inspired by radioactivity, X-rays, and ultraviolet light.
All right. I guess it's kind of rays that spread out or particles, depending.
Well, you see this a lot, though. One guy wants to come up with these crazy theories. He gets one acolyte, and they call it a movement.
They still do that.
Oh, yeah, I know they do. In fact, they're doing it because they're LARPing these people. But remember that every avant-garde artist across Europe could fit into a ballroom. And another such example, this is a guy we've already talked about, Kazimir Malevich. In 1913, he does this work called The Knife Grinder.
So this is like the mechanical Happy Merchant?
Basically.
Okay.
But yeah, you see the cubism, you see the futurists' focus on machines and mechanization, talking about where the world is going. This guy is not exactly J.R.R. Tolkien when it comes to seeing beauty in nature, but to be honest, most people outside of the British Empire don't see that either. But by 1915, he writes a manifesto about how he's going to push Cubism even farther and call it suprematism. And we got this work, which we mentioned in our pre-World War I episode, The Black Square. If you remember, Malevich says this is the most honest painting ever, because a landscape is just a representation, but he says this is a painting of a black square, and it's actually a black square. This is actually what these people are saying in their
At a
manifestos.
certain point, you have to have John Cleese run in dressed as a policeman. It's like, out of the pool, cop.
Yep.
Stop now. This is too silly.
Well, that was World War I, I think. This is the avant-garde milieu which Rodchenko steps into when he's starting out. And when I say milieu, I mean like 5 art collectors in Moscow, like Sergei Shukin, who's buying Vincent van Gogh stuff. And those art collectors are going to have a really bad time when the communists take over and declare their collections to be bourgeois. But if you're collecting this shit, fuck it. You deserve to be gulagged.
Yeah, this is ridiculous.
But it is worth taking a look at Malevich's manifesto and his explanation of the Black Square, because Rodchenko is going to run with some of these ideas when he becomes a Soviet bigwig.
At a certain point, you need to just tar and feather these people.
Yeah, no disagreement.
This is like...
No disagreement from me. Malevich, he talks about how he discovered the zero of form and dragged himself out of academic art, and how he's not some academic savage worried about losing the foundation of art. So he's like every 18-year-old who thinks he's figured out the mathematical equation to make everything run. I was that 18-year-old, but this guy never moved beyond it. He says art requires truth, not sincerity, and that sincere artists are dull. Are you starting to see how it's awfully convenient to these people that nobody can define art?
Sounds like some commie gobbledygook.
Yeah.
Rest in peace.
Rest in peace, Norm. And Norm had the perfect way of saying everything. He's essentially writing this essay about how his Black Square is the next logical step because it's pure. He wanks on for a few pages about how he meditated on painting and it led him to discover suprematism. And like any of these fuckers, in his mind, he's not just a crazy guy making up bullshit. He's Christopher fucking Columbus. He's sailing uncharted waters, coming across a vast land of riches that everybody else needs to be told about. Because he made the profound discovery that a green square is a green square.
Like the kids when dubstep was really big.
Yeah, that's a good
that
one.
level of pretension.
Yep. But then Malevich makes a statement that pretty much sums up modernity. He says that up until now, it was thought that you preserve beautiful things by painting them, but now we know a new beauty in the collision of forms with people like Paul Cézanne, the Cubists, etc., who were freed from the impression of the, quote, wholeness of objects. Maybe this is just me, but this sounds an awful lot like the girl with a political science degree who thinks she's on the cutting edge of discovering new genders. Like maybe there are just 2 genders, darling.
At a certain point, you got to show your work, guy.
Yeah. Even if you show your work, it's bullshit. It's just sophistry.
Yeah, if you start with 0 equaling 1,
Yeah,
you can prove anything you
basically, yes. Yeah. No, these people, they've discovered fuck all, but within the bureaucracy, there are certainly career opportunities available to people who play along, especially if they say that this bullshit is profound. And because it's the 20s, you need to reference psychology and Freud and Jung. So he says the square is not some subconscious form, it just is. Because of course.
I think Orwell talked about, like, this is, I'm not surprised that, like, totalitarian governments gravitated towards this kind of nonsense, because, like, if you can make people say this is great art,
Yep.
like, that's, that's, like, reality, the party determines reality. Like, I get, like...
You know who said that this kind of nonsense just spiritually sums these people up? A guy who's going to become the dictator of Germany in the 30s. But we'll be talking about him in the next episode.
I think I heard about this guy.
Yeah, he at least tried to get into art school.
Yeah, some very interesting ideas about it.
So Malevich just ends with a statement that I'm sure he thought was the deepest thing ever. He says, "We throw the way open to you, and you must hurry because tomorrow you won't recognize us." Well, Casimir, it's 110 years later. We still recognize this because the exact same charlatans in the art world are still painting lines and dots on a canvas and telling the rest of us that we just don't get it.
We see every one of you frauds.
Yeah.
You hear that, Lotus?
I'm just saying that contrary to Kazimir Malevich's imperative that we need to rush, I don't think we need to rush too much. In fact, I think we should take a step back and look a little more closely at these things, because it is another clue to the mystery of how art got ugly. Now, the manifesto about black squares being the zero of forms, it's nonsensical and we can laugh at it, but he goes on a tirade halfway through about the history of art that he's building on, about how his idea of suprematism is just the next obvious step, because clearly this is the next obvious step after Michelangelo. He talks about how the people in the Renaissance captured emotions and everything else has just been imitation of that since then. And then he says, without really justifying it at all, Renaissance artists never succeeded at capturing everything about the human condition, so why should we keep imitating them? Because clearly this captures so much more about the human condition.
You can tell this guy thought he was on the right side of history.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in fact, he says that the idea of painting things from nature is so played out that you literally can't be creative anymore unless you paint a machine or do something abstract.
I got a group of 7 middle fingers up for you, buddy.
Wait till the next episode for that. I actually think there are going to be 2 episodes from now. He talks about how the recent developments in art, like the Impressionists, the Cubists, the Futurists, etc., and he talks about how his own movement, suprematism, is just what naturally comes next, because of course it does. So I'm happy to say that all of this stuff is bullshit, but it's a self-referential corpus of bullshit, and that's why we've needed to go through all of it. Because if you've been paying attention to the last 7 episodes of me spurting out over this stuff, you will recognize a few issues with this guy's theories. First, he describes the Renaissance. He's clearly talking about Vasari's book, The Lives. Like the 1560s are the Counter-Reformation, when the Catholic Church is putting a bunch of rules in place for what painting and sculpture is, and what you are and are not allowed to do. It was not terribly effective to violently oppress these new pesky Protestant movements, so the Catholics needed to make sure they looked more spiritually and intellectually sound. Well, after this kerfuffle, Vasari wrote his book as a 200-year retrospective on painting, and of course it was propaganda. We talked about this, not least because Michelangelo lived till he was almost 90 and was still alive, and Vasari was trying to suck up to him. And a couple of centuries later, Reynolds took Vasari's intellectualized view of painting and called it art. Now, fast forward 2 more centuries, we're in the 1920s, the age of capital P progress, and every one of these goddamn intellectuals needs to say he's part of building the new future. So it's not just, I'm an eccentric with a trust fund and enough money to buy paint and put a black square on a canvas. Every last one of these motherfuckers is essentially writing fan fiction that starts in the Renaissance. Every last one of them is essentially saying, Renaissance, Joshua Reynolds, Impressionists, me. We can't...
Nothing ever changes.
No, I know nothing ever changes, but they're also saying, you know, we're taking the next step. We can't paint like Renaissance artists. What are we, cavemen, troglodytes? So they start retroactively defining a lot of things as art and start saying, well, Vincent van Gogh was at the leading edge of art in 1888, and therefore my black square or my urinal is the leading edge of art now. And also, whatever they're rebelling against on a given week, they label it bourgeois, because of course they do.
Up yours, Dad.
Yeah. In the early Soviet Union, and then as we'll see in the 1940s, these theories are no longer just going to be the purview of some crazy hipsters in the cities, like in Montmartre. They become institutionalized, especially in the institutions that hand out grant money. And that's why you can't just say that contemporary art looks like shit, because the Museum of Modern Art will just say, oh, you poor Philistine, you just lack the context.
Jesus.
Whatever the fuck this context is, it's always some poorly written narrative that goes Renaissance Impressionist to me, and it's like when Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Mormon and spent the opening pages writing about a prophet who foresees a man named Joseph Smith writing the Book of Mormon. That's exactly what this is.
Yep.
Nowadays, that chain usually includes some obscure woman of color who scholars now believe may have been genderqueer. But it always leads to the current exhibition that pushes boundaries, or at least is used to launder money. So Malevich, he's doing his suprematism in 1915, which was pre-revolution, so he can't have been trying to get a Soviet commission. So when he says he's continuing to blaze a trail started in the Renaissance and now moving forward to a world of Einstein's discoveries, you should just read it as a hipster watching Neil deGrasse Tyson and then talking about quantum physics. That's what this shit is. Cringeworthy, yes, but it's pre-revolution, so at least he's not asking for money to wank on about quarks and neutrinos. Post-revolution, it's a different story. If we ever get to the point where poorly written Captain America fan fiction is taught in universities, and we may be at that point already for all I know, in fact we probably are.
I'm sure you can get a degree in comic books.
Yeah.
I'm sure you can.
Well, I'm sure you can get a degree in comic books, but can you now get a degree in fan fiction about comic books?
Probably.
Because that's what this is. This is fan fiction about Vincent Van Gogh.
I know you can write theses on fan fiction.
Yeah.
So that's that's coming pretty close to the line. If it's not fucking.
But anyways, if we get to the point where Captain America fan fiction is taught in universities, it will have gotten there through the exact same laundering process as all of these crazy art theories. Some untalented writer manages to convince the funding council that her fan fiction is profound because it has minority representation, and now it's easier to add to the curriculum than it is to explain why it's not just poorly written. But enough about Margaret Atwood. So going back to Rodchenko, he becomes an avant-garde artist in 1915, right in time to be recruited by the revolutionaries in 1917.
Right place, right time.
Exactly. And he becomes the head of the constructivists, at least in an official manner, not just the one-head dirty hipster in the city. Now, he's going to be the government's lead constructivist. And like all of these avant-garde artists, you just see him going through the movements. So first of all, this is called the dance. This is Cubo-Futurism, which we just talked about, like the Russian combination of both Cubism and Futurism at the same time. Then he does suprematism. So in the vein of the Black Square, he does some of that stuff. Like does this. Yeah, this is called White Circle on the left because it's a white circle. The one on the right is red and yellow because it's red and yellow. Profound, right?
It's like fucking cross-eyed fucking mess.
I guess this one is kind of cool. It kind of looks like an album cover or something. But is this fine art? Is this like on the level of Michelangelo? No, it's not.
Well, this is like a good logo for like your beer league sports team.
Well, again, all of this graphic design logos, it literally comes from the first 5 years of the Soviet Union. So I'm not saying Rodchenko is not talented in his own way, but like, am I going to say that this is the same as the big, beautiful portraits that you see in museums and art galleries? No, I'm not.
There's a skill gap there.
And then he does this thing.
Oh, that's ugly.
This is called Spatial Construction number 12. He is trying to rethink sculpture for the revolution because it's the Russian Revolution and you need to rethink everything. Now, let me ask you, what do you think he's rethinking with this?
He should be thinking what he's going to be eating. He should be securing a food supply.
Again, we mentioned earlier that Stalin's going to just make him publicly denounce all of his theories. And it keeps him out of the gulag, unlike some of his colleagues. He's trying to rethink sculpture for the revolution, and he says the art of the future will not be cozy decorations for domestic apartments. So he builds this thing out of a bunch of loops of wood.
In the future, people will hate art.
Basically.
Congratulations, comrade.
So he has to rethink sculpture to be revolutionary. So he literally says, this thing does not go on pedestal. This thing hangs from ceiling by a string.
Oh, God.
I'm not making this up, guys. If you go to an art history class and they talk about the constructivists, professors talk about this like it's profound. This is what he's talking about. Said, up until revolution, sculpture stays on plinth, stays on platform. Now it hangs from string.
Yep. That's where we're at, guys.
I am sure that the peasants in the factory and in the fields are going to love hearing that.
How did they ever kill like 60 million people?
And just in case you want to know how ridiculous it is, we talked in the last couple of episodes about how the Museum of Modern Art is the arbiter of taste. This is the Museum of Modern Art. This is their suprematist exhibition, their gallery. In fact, you see some of the paintings we just looked at, especially the second one from the left. That was Rodchenko's Black Swirly, whatever it was called. But there's that thing hanging from the ceiling.
Yeah,
This is the Museum of Modern Art.
They did what he wanted.
I don't know how to make it more explicit than this. This is what the black turtleneck crowd honestly thinks is profound. It hangs from ceiling. It does not sit on platform.
It's like, very unconventional about its relationship with gravity.
Just wait. Again, it sounds stupid and pointless. Welcome to the foundation of modern art, and I guarantee you that our friend Lotus thinks it's profound to hang film from the ceiling because some professor told her that it was profound to hang this thing from the ceiling. I guarantee it. I'm not even saying that as a joke.
Lotus! Why you know to calculus, Lotus?
I'm just saying there is zero creativity in contemporary art. Not a little bit, zero. They heard this shit in their art history class when it came to the unit on constructivism, and they're just banking on the rest of us not knowing it.
That makes a lot of sense.
But don't tell me any of these ridiculous art installations is any more or less ridiculous than that thing hanging from the ceiling.
No, once you hit peak, once you hit ridiculous, where do you go from there?
Yeah. So when it comes to retarded academic theories that lie at the foundation of the 20th century art, the gold mine is 1921 at the first constructivist exhibition titled 5 × 5 = 25. Now, here's the cover of the catalog, and I can almost forgive this. Almost. I'm a millennial. I think this kind of has a mid-2000s post-grunge aesthetic. So, fine. But again, not original, played out before 1923. That's the main point I'm trying to make here. Imagine being at an alternative music venue in the year 2002. You'd have seen graffiti on the wall that looked like this.
This looks like Lee's Palace. If this
Exactly.
was like Lee's Palace in 2008, this would track.
Again, I'm not saying it's even ugly. I'm just saying it's not original.
Yeah.
I'm saying it's 1923. In fact, 1921. It's a very Soviet thing to do to name an art exhibition after a math equation, but that's not the egregious thing. In fact, I could almost say that name 5 × 5 = 25 is somewhat creative because 5 painters are going to exhibit 5 paintings each. But Rodchenko is going to make a very bold claim. Building on Malevich's theories about how a black square on a white background is the next logical step for art, for every retarded theory, there's always an intellectual looking to build on it and extend it into an even more retarded theory, and Rodchenko is going to say, wait a second. Malevich take the next step in art by painting canvas white and putting black square on it. That means I take art even farther by painting canvas one color.
Oh, God.
So 5 artists submit 5 works of art. These are 3 of Rodchenko's works of art.
Yes, I believe they believed in what they were doing, so they're not charlatans. But it's like...
No, this guy was looking for Soviet money.
Oh.
Some of these people were not charlatans. There's a very good chance. This was the genesis of just saying academic shit because you wanted the official... Yeah, you wanted the government commission.
Okay.
No, I can say a lot of these people were true believers. I'm not convinced that these fucking Soviet fuckers were not true believers. Maybe they were, but not all of them were. So yeah, his idea is he's going to take art all the way to completion by painting the entire canvas one color. And the best part is that he says that his formal research led him to this conclusion.
I have citation.
I just hope that after all of the work that we've put into 7 episodes of researching how art got ugly, you're finally getting some insight into how these fuckers in the art world are wired. Because this is exactly how they're wired today. Exactly. They haven't taken a step beyond this. This is exactly where the art world is. And again, we have to call back to previous episodes, because if all of these silly theories are making claims, we need to have the background to rebut these claims. And in our Montmartre episode, we talked about the Salon of the Incoherence in Paris in 1883, where a guy named Alphonse Allais did exactly the same thing as a lighthearted joke. He painted a canvas all white and called it the First Communion of Anemic Young Girls in the Snow, followed up with an all-black canvas called Negroes Fighting in a Cave at Night. It was written in French, so I'm sure it was usually translated a little bit differently than Negroes, but let's not get banned off of YouTube. And Malevich was aware of that because he mentioned his all-black canvas in the notes. The difference is that when the Salon of the Incoherence was done in Paris in the 1880s, it was supposed to be a fun night out on the town for people who appreciated culture but didn't want to take themselves too seriously. The 5x5 exhibit is an official event sanctioned by the Soviet government.
Jesus.
And Rodchenko is seriously talking about this stuff like it's part of an academic theory that requires formal research. So
That explains a lot.
yeah, yes it does. Again, I did not know any of this stuff when I started this, and it's just the farther I dig into these primary documents, my eyebrows just go up like, holy shit. This really is as vacuous as I think it is, and it was vacuous from day one. Now, Rodchenko is going to seriously talk about his monochromatic paintings like he's making some sort of a deep philosophical point. He is going to talk about how beautiful paintings are bourgeois and revolutionary painting has to be utilitarian. Because
Must also be fun.
well, what's more utilitarian than this? He has writings and interviews from the period talking about how painting has reached its limit. I'm not making this up. This is exactly what art history professors talk about now.
Yep.
I'm reading this from the source. But this is why Marcel Duchamp's stunt with the urinal was reactive and not visionary. Because this milieu where every creative endeavor is deconstructing itself, in this milieu, the concept of art has been completely deconstructed twice in two different places. First of all, Duchamp thinks he was profound by putting a urinal in an art gallery and saying, but what truly is art? And Rodchenko thinks he's profound by painting a canvas all red and asking, but what truly is art? So, evolutionary biologists call it parallel evolution when you see the same traits in unrelated species who face the same selective pressure. You see the same selective pressure in both New York and Moscow.
Okay.
So I'm calling it right now. You're hearing it right now, folks. The 5-year period after World War I, the word art ceases to be a coherent concept, and that is why you don't see anything truly original after 1925. That's my thesis. I'm saying it right now. We still have a ways to go before we hash this out completely, but I'm calling it, folks. No art anymore. But because one silly manifesto isn't enough, Rodchenko writes a second manifesto referring to the 5x5 exhibition. Now, assuming my translation is accurate, I am reading this verbatim, and it sounds like bad slam poetry. If you went to a slam poetry night in the hipster neighborhood circa 2009, you would hear something that sounds exactly like this, and I swear I'm not making this up. We did not create the technology. We did not create man, but we, the artists of yesterday, the constructors, that constructors is on all capitals, of today, have worked upon man and are organizing man. Before, the engineers took their recreation in art. Now, the artists take their recreation in technology. So again, this is where he's talking about himself as building on Malevich's ideas. Then there came one who had really seen and simply showed a square. This means opening one's eyes to the plane. Who has truly seen an angle? Who has truly seen a framework, a diagram? Everyone and no one. Then came one who had really seen and simply showed a line, and he's referring to himself here.
Of course, of course.
You'll see that shortly, but he's referring to himself as the one who truly saw a line. Then we came along, the first working group of constructivists, Alexei Gan, Rodchenko, Stepanova. Rodchenko is him, Stepanova is his wife.
Of course.
So this group, 2/3 of this group is this man's marriage.
Jesus.
And we simply said, this is today. Technology is the mortal enemy of art. This is the Book of Mormon, talking in the third person as if he was fucking foreseen by Karl Marx and scientifically proven, just like communism is scientifically proven to be the endpoint of humanity.
This is how Ron Hubbard shit.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. But now, as I said, Rodchenko is really going to beat you over the head with the subtlety of George Lucas dialogue. The square, 1915, Malevich's laboratory. The line, the grid, the dot, 1919, Rodchenko's laboratory. But after this, the first working group of constructivists proclaimed the communist expression of material structures and uncompromising war on art, everything came to a head. Others, fascinated by our slogans, imagining themselves geniuses, design elevators and radio posters, but they have forgotten that all attention must be focused on the experimental laboratories, which show us new elements, paths, objects, experiments. There you have it. In black and white, art is finished. We are doing something different called constructivism. We're not doing art anymore.
That makes a lot of, okay. I feel better now. That
The
makes sense.
art history narrative has just been shown to be incoherent with a horrible piece of slam poetry because it talks about the constructivists like they're some sort of visionaries taking the next step beyond art. Nobody in the black turtleneck crowd has a bad word to say about these people, especially when you start talking about architecture. And yet the apparatchik who decided what constructivism was had zero desire to retain any continuity with the past. Whatever art is, it was bourgeois and needs to be torn down for this soulless mechanical society. Yeah, supposedly everybody's going to be happy in this new society.
If they take enough Soma.
Well, as any mediocre artist can tell you, the Arts Council giveth and the Arts Council taketh away. And by 1923, the Mensheviks have been defeated, and Lenin now has time to focus on actually running his country. And Lenin gets wind of this nonsense.
You've been doing what?
Basically, yes. Basically, yes. So again, this is what I was saying earlier. A lot of people think that Lenin died and Stalin came in and Stalin got rid of all of this stuff and Stalin screwed everything up. No, 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 no. As soon as the Russian Civil War was over, Lenin had some very strong opinions about these people.
So daddy communism came in like Jesus with the money changers. Threw these people out of the temple.
Yeah, so again, it's a complete flash in the pan in 1920 and 1921. That's constructivism. These people run the academies for a year while the Red Army is too busy fighting the White Army. And then after that's finished, they are promptly shunted off stage. But these ideas are going to end up in the West largely through intellectuals who are enamored by the experiment that is the Soviet Union, and these ideas are just going to poison the well to this day. There will still be people like Clement Greenberg who try to salvage one united narrative of art after World War II, but that is not going to survive the 60s when a guy named Andy Warhol comes around.
Oh, this guy.
Yeah, that guy. Rodchenko, he does keep a job for a few years. He is put in charge of propaganda, both for the government and as an advertiser for state corporations, so he does some of this stuff. What do you think the one on the right is?
Don't give baby lots of gun toy and explosive.
Those are supposed to be pacifiers.
Oh, Jesus
Binkies.
Christ. That's fucked up. No wonder communists are such a...
Just to be clear, though, I mean, the guy is talented. This does define the aesthetics of Soviet propaganda. The designs are clear. He cut out all the blocks, especially for the letters in the negative space. He cut it all out by hand. So I'm not going to question his technical skill.
It looks like on the right, if a freaking South Park character did acid.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Anyway.
He didn't have Microsoft Word. He didn't have word art where you can easily put letters into 3D or into perspective. So you have to admire the autistic level of craftsmanship at least. But Lenin and then certainly Stalin are not going to share his optimism about a bunch of cerebral geometric theories inspiring the Russian peasants to read. And by 1922, they're going to say, yeah, that's nice, but we're going to focus on painters who can paint a bunch of smiling factory workers and peasants. But Rodchenko still works for a few years doing things like advertisements, like the one on the right.
Yep.
Until Stalin says, all right, that's enough. You're denouncing this pretentious stuff or you're off to the gulag.
All right, enough of this creepy bullshit.
But leave it to Western intellectuals to resuscitate a bad idea, because in the 1970s, you see the West try to resurrect constructivism, and that's where you get that most ridiculous concept of contemporary art, the art installation. Strictly speaking, Tatlin's claim that I string brass wire between two walls and now art make use of 3 dimensions is him making these proto-art installations, but the guy who really makes the art installation a thing is a man named L. Lissitzky. Lissitzky, he's another young guy who gets caught up in the avant-garde right in time to be part of the revolution. Now, in our 2 avant-garde episodes, I tried to make 2 points. The first is that all these people are just the types you would have seen in Vice magazine in 2005.
Yeah.
These types are not new. They're just angsty children of middle-class parents who have existed since the Industrial Revolution created a middle class.
You come out of a frickin' factory, basically, these kids.
The second point is that most of these people were not really visionaries tearing down the rules so much as people who just got jobs as illustrators at a time when there were new methods of printing and lithography being introduced. Like Ambrose Villard, he is remembered as the art dealer and gallery owner who gave the big break to Cézanne, Gauguin, Matisse, Picasso, and posthumously Van Gogh.
So it's like the guys who started YouTube in 2006.
Yep, exactly.
But who didn't molest anyone? Or at least
That's a small list.
I'm saying, it's that Venn diagram is almost a circle.
But Villard, he was also running a publishing company on the side, and he was using a lot of these people as illustrators. And to both of these points, especially the one about everybody being a type you'd see in Brooklyn, L. Lissitzky, he's just a rich Jewish kid from the Pale of Settlement who illustrates children's books, and then decides that he should be the one in charge of overhauling society with his art.
Nothing like a children's album. Because children's entertainers are such moral, upstanding people.
Well, that's just what I'm saying. Like, to be clear, like, even though I don't read a word of Yiddish or Hebrew, like, I can see the charm in this, but I'm not going to question his talent. I just don't want Dr. Seuss and Maurice Sendak overhauling society. That's all I'm saying. So here's a couple of his other children's book illustrations. Again, not questioning the man's talent as a children's book illustrator, just questioning his talent as the utopian overhauling society as a social engineer. But here's some of his other works. Again, no complaints about that.
I wouldn't let my kid read a book like looks like the cover that they do of Catcher in the Rye sometimes.
Yeah. Well, here's actually the cover of a Rudyard Kipling story.
Oh.
The story is called The Elephant's Child. So, again, that's charming. I'm not saying it isn't. He also does a weird self-portrait, which, again, looks like something straight out of every graduating arts class. This thing.
Looks like an elderly Joe Rogan.
Well, an elderly Jewish Joe Rogan.
Joe Rogan's not Jewish?
No. As far as I know.
I always just thought.
No, he's Italian.
Yeah, I'm like Jewish Italian.
He's an Ellis Islander. Is there, as far as the Ellis Island immigrants are concerned, is there really any difference between a Jew and an Italian?
All Mediterranean people are cousins, and I don't distinguish between them.
Yeah. So, this is somebody you would have seen at some boutique advertising firm in the 90s, and he's a direct protege of Malevich, Black Square guy. He even illustrates Malevich's book about how the black square is going to be the central object of this new Soviet art.
Do you think he had to do like Weinstein stuff to please the Black Square dude?
Do I think he had to, or do I think he wanted to?
Yeah.
Here's his illustrations of the new book, and this is supposed to be an academic tome.
Jesus.
This is not like a weird, eccentric coffee table thing. This is like him explaining how the fucking square and the circle are going to be the foundation of art going forward.
Here's what we do. Every university is going to have a sergeant at arms now. It's like a Cotton Hill.
So this guy is completely up his own ass about his theories, but he's even going to build on the black square theory. He's going to build on suprematism to invent something new called the Proun, or the Proun. I don't know how you pronounce that. It's some sort of a acronym in Russian.
So you've now got the bullshit accumulating.
Yes, you do. And Proun, it translates roughly to Project for the Affirmation of the New. And he is just going to be the apostle of reducing everything to geometric shapes. Now, again, his geometric designs, some of them at least, actually look kind of cool. I can admit that. First, he does this very famous propaganda poster, which I think he may overestimate the clarity of, but this is a very well-known poster. What do you think this is supposed to represent?
The human condition?
No, this is supposed to be represent the Bolsheviks, the Reds, beating the Whites.
Oh, okay, I see it now.
This is why Lenin and Stalin said, yeah, you guys are maybe a little too cerebral for the peasants, for the Gopniks.
The Gopnik will not die for this.
No, they won't.
We say, where did cousin Yuri go? And we point to this painting? He's going to fucking get a pitchfork and a torch.
But you are going to still send the Gopnik into the firing line. And he goes, oh, of course.
Many thousands at a time. He's proud tradition in Russia.
Yeah, like I said, Lenin and Stalin, they do not appreciate this kind of shit when it comes to brainwashing people. But I will say that Lisitsky's other supremacist and constructivist stuff may have aesthetic value. First of all, this is Proun 99. As again, these are all numbered because it's communism. It's made from metallic paint. I can see some aesthetic quality here, but this is also not the Sistine Chapel.
This is like, painting my Warhammer figurines level.
Yeah. Or just what you doodle in the back of your notebook.
Yeah.
The next thing you have is this one, Proun 1C.
I call it useless shelf.
I call it something that makes Banksy look a lot less original.
Yeah, fair.
If he had just stuck with these things, there would not have been too much of a problem with it. It is a bit ethereal, but this is also the age of De Chirico and the Surrealists, and it clearly inspired people like M.C. Escher. So I'm not criticizing these paintings, I'm just criticizing the zero-sum attitude that says we need to get rid of Michelangelo and Rembrandt because now this is real art. But you can see some real talent here. I'm not saying you can't. Malevich and Rodchenko, they talk about how art needs to be made from shapes and lines, and this guy is the Spurg who actually manages to pull it off.
I just want to congratulate Spurge.
Yeah,
way to go, one.
Look, I work software in my day job. I'm a software engineer in my day job. I've seen this phenomenon. If you give an ASPIE free rein to do whatever, you get something convoluted that nobody understands. If you give an ASPIE very strict guardrails, you can sometimes get some very creative results. This is the population that was told you're not allowed to tune out, so they invented the concept of the femboy.
Yep. Yeah, this is a smart group of people, guys.
So the problem is not these hypergeometric creations. The problem is the belief that it's going to be the aesthetic of a utopian society that values purity. I would be remiss not to note that this utopian hyper-mechanized aesthetic is black and white.
Yeah.
Like,
No
sure,
ambiguity here.
you want to build your wonderful society, Al, Mr. Lisitsky, it's going to be black and white. I don't want to live in a black and white world. But while I can have some sympathy for these geometric two-dimensional paintings, here's where he loses that sympathy. This is Proun Room 1923, reconstructed in 1965 at the Berlin Art Exhibition. The fuck is this?
Looks like a freaking game you get on your cell phone.
Yeah, you're right. This looks like Myst or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, like an escape from the room
Yeah,
game.
something like you gotta drop balls into this and
Yeah.
make something happen.
Yep. This is where we get the concept of the nonsensical art installation with a paragraph about challenging notions. This thing was built in 1923, and it was ready to be sent to the ash can of history where it belongs when Stalin came in. But of course, it was reconstructed in the 60s for a modern art exhibition in Berlin, when the West just had to say, well, real shitty communist art has never been tried. There were certainly other things that you might consider art installations where you could argue that the audience was supposed to be part of the experience. Most famously, you had Wagner's Ring Cycle and a few of the futurist operas where there was audience participation. But in the Soviet Union, we need to toss out all of the old stuff and create a new concept of art. You had old art with its showing off the talent of the painter, and it's making the bourgeois people comfortable, and it's not looking like shit. Now you're going to have new art, which is collective, and the artist is not an individual, but part of the revolution, and as part of that, the people now have to be part of the art exhibit, because communism. And one...
You do it!
Well... I'll give you an example. One so-called work of art is going to be gathering a bunch of people every year and reenacting the overthrow of the Tsar. It's not just some silly commemorative festival. It's now got to be called communal art.
Oh, jeez. So LARPing.
Exactly. And to show how ridiculous this stuff got, here is a picture of Rodchenko dressed like a mechanic, supposed to be the artist and the new man.
It's like Dr. Evil.
Looks like a guy in the Village People. It looks like a gay guy who would show up to Village People night.
Looks like an older guy who likes your vibe at a gay club.
This is supposed to be the new man. But Lissitzky, he's going to take those ideas of communal and collective art, and he's going to invent the modern art installation where he hung a bunch of those wood blocks on the wall and said, now the people actually must stand in the middle of my artwork. The people's experience is part of the art. Nowadays, some gallery curator would use almost exactly the same language. He would just say the word immersive.
Yep.
You are immersed in the experience.
Yeah, same thing.
You know, you would use the word immersive to hide the fact that you're just staring at fucking blocks nailed to the wall,
Yep.
and you have to pretend it's profound. In his own words, Lissitzky said that that kind of stuff was an interchange station between two-dimensional painting and architecture, challenging traditional perspectives. Again, that is a direct quote. But remember how Lotus said, I am inhabiting a state of being in between by hanging film in a greenhouse?
Lotus!
It's exactly the same fucking thing.
Lotus! Why you plagiarize? I watched this YouTube video and they caught you!
Yeah, we caught the bitch. He also called it a spatial composition. But he just stick to the drawing the pictures for children's books, please. You're not a bad painter. But, you know, I'm sure if you were in his room with all the wood blocks nailed to the wall, you'd say that he put a lot of thought into the precise measurements to get the sightlines just right. Fine, I'm just saying, take a step back and ask the most important question. What's the fucking point? What's the fucking point of perfect sightlines for a bunch of blocks of wood nailed to the wall? I'm sure he had some idea in mind about how people are no longer just passive consumers of the art, but I am perfectly content to be a passive consumer of art that doesn't look like shit.
I just realized this guy looks like a Nickelodeon producer.
Well, you also see his constructions in the back there are supposed to be hanging from the ceiling.
How badly do you want the job, Amanda? You want to be a star?
Oh, she got ruined.
They fucked that girl crazy.
Yes.
Oh, I've been watching YouTube videos about what they did to those kids. It makes Disney look like ethical. Nickelodeon's fucking shit with those kids. They were just fucking... It was a boy and girl buffet for those fuckers.
Every time you see a doily draped on a car or a bunch of film hanging from the ceiling, this is what it harkens back to. Russian Dr. Seuss trying to rethink art for the sake of the government.
This creepy fuck who just wants to molest your kids.
Yeah. Doing stuff for this government that within 20 years was sending millions to the Gulag and starving another 7 million in the Holodomor and then executing 1 million people doing the Great Purge.
I can't believe this man would do anything unethical. Look at him. Come on.
Oh no, this guy was forced to denounce his...
Oh, that's right. His boss must be nice too, I'm sure.
But now, art just had to incorporate all of these stupid ideas to qualify as art, otherwise you are going to be accused of being subversive and counter-revolutionary, and you do not want to be accused of being counter-revolutionary. We live in a world now where you go to the Museum of Modern Art, there is a single institutional arbiter of what qualifies as art, and they have decided that everything needs to come from this ridiculous intellectual lineage. And now that we live in that world, it's over.
So art is science. Modern art Scientology.
Yes, it is.
I didn't think we'd get here, but here
It
we
is.
are.
Or the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, the Book of Mormon or any weird fucking shit. The fucking Urantia book, fucking Heaven's Gate, any of that fuck.
To show just how much of this stuff is driven by politics and not so much by the aesthetics, El Lisitsky, the guy doing his crowns, he magically stops doing it right around the time that Trotsky was forced to flee. Draw your own conclusions on that one.
Convenient.
So again, I know this episode is running long, but we are structuring things like Rashomon, and I need to finish on one last note, which is how we tie together the stories of the Italian futurists and the Russian constructivists. Because nothing happens in a vacuum, and it's easy to forget that these stories are going on simultaneously over a relatively short period. We talked about Marinetti, who was the head of the futurists, who was friends with Mussolini. Marinetti, he was a poet, and just like Ezra Pound, just like T.S. Eliot, he didn't stick to a meter, and he often used fragmented language to evoke the sound of the machinery of modern life. So imagine some Italian guy reading a poem with the crazy sounds of boop, boop, but this is the factory.
So basically like Italian Trent Reznor.
Basically. Yeah, he was celebrating progress in the abstract, and once again, a 21st century hipster activity, slam poetry is the farthest thing from cutting edge and original. It was meant for the 1920s when there was at least an ethos of we're getting rid of this sentimental Victorian shit and embracing the machines and making weird sounds. It just doesn't work when everyone has a smartphone in their pocket, and that's why, that's one of many reasons why slam poetry is so cringe. But Marinetti's contemporary in Russia is a guy named Vladimir Mayakovsky, who had joined the Russian futurist group. Marinetti, he is nominally the head of the Russian futurists, especially pre-revolution, but they're the same movement in name only, the Italian futurists and the Russian futurists. And the Italian futurists, they fetishize the machines and dream of building a new Italy that breaks with tradition when it needs to. The Russian futurists, on the other hand, they're Bolsheviks who just want to overthrow the entire system and break with the past completely, not just in Russia, but worldwide. And when all of these Tsarist institutions are terminated, most of the creative positions in the new post-revolutionary Soviet Union, they're going to go to futurists and constructivists. And like all of the others, Mayakovsky, he ends up in Moscow in his late teens and his early 20s, right in time to become involved with the avant-garde and the revolution. And he ends up becoming the early creative mouthpiece of the Soviet Union. When you think of Soviet apparatchiks, you think of people like Molotov, who are skilled public speakers standing on a podium explaining why the crop failure is due to subversives. And according to science, the revolution will give us bountiful crops in just a few years. That's not Mayakovsky.
Comrades, trust the expert.
Yes. At one point during the Holodomor, when the census said that the population of the Ukraine had dropped, they disappeared, the head of the Census Bureau. Not making that up either.
And to this day, tankies will cite the We'll cite the census saying, see, Stalin couldn't have killed that many people. Look at the census data.
History is history, folks.
Sorry, guys.
So Mayakovsky is not Molotov, a skilled public speaker. Mayakovsky is a fucking gopnik who is always 3 shots of vodka deep and determined to make all of the worst decisions possible in his personal life.
So Borat?
Half the Russian gopniks.
Yeah,
Let's not pretend he's unusual in that regard.
80% of your age.
The Russian futurists, they dress in these flamboyant outfits, but Mayakovsky, probably because he spends all of his money on booze, can't afford the full wardrobe. So he becomes known as the guy who just shows up in a bright yellow scarf everywhere he goes.
Fucking awesome. Oh,
Does he not look fucking sloshed in every one of these pictures?
I would ask his pronouns if I saw some of these fucking pictures. I'd be like, I'd be sensitive to that with this guy. If he
I'm not trying to be mean to the guy. I think these are representative of the pictures I could find. I could not find a picture where he did not look like he was about to vomit the vodka.
Oh yeah, especially on the left there.
If this guy showed up to your bar, you would have denied him service.
Not just because he's Russian. You know, there would have been.
It's like, I don't speak Russian. I cannot speak to the quality of this man's poetry. But during the post-revolutionary period, when there's a demand for people doing weird shit to signal that the old, respectable bourgeois culture is over, this is your guy. As a short list of this man's cultural experiments, he writes a bunch of poems glorifying the October Revolution, and because it's communist and collective, they're supposed to be chanted out.
Yeah.
You've seen that at Occupy Wall Street a few years ago.
You think they did jazz hands instead of clapping like those kids?
I'm not saying they wouldn't have. I'm just saying they didn't. He writes a children's book teaching the Cyrillic equivalent of the ABCs to children. And I'm not sure how much of this gets lost in translation, but it has lines like, B is for bureaucrats, bloated and slow, stamping papers while the revolution's aglow.
Jesus Christ.
That may just be a clever translation, I don't know, but this is the kind of shit he's doing.
Oh, God.
And of course, that book about the ABCs for children, it's meant to be read at the circus.
Get your communist propaganda here.
I feel bad for the citizens of Moscow who were happy pre-revolution, who now just had to watch this shit.
Yeah.
They just had to watch their beautiful ancient civilization, well, their ancient civilization.
Yeah, just fucking
just end up in the hands of these retards.
Oh. Yeah, I wonder how that would feel.
What else does Mayakovsky do? In 1922, he collaborates with a man named Arseny Avramov on the Symphony of Sirens, where they went to Baku, now in Azerbaijan, in...
Fuck you, Putin.
Well, on the 5th anniversary of the revolution, they went to Baku and performed a citywide symphony using the factory whistles and sirens.
Oh, God.
I'm sure the citizens just loved hearing that one.
I know. Okay, guys, I know these sounds are novel to you. They are not novel to the people that work in these fucking factories. So maybe we can give them something different.
Well, I'm sure the peasants just love the fact that they now got to be part of a collective artwork.
If you notice there are fewer potatoes, you are bad.
And throw the Jew down the well. In my country there is problem, and this problem is bourgeois art.
They take everybody money, they produce very bad. Throw him probably down the well.
Now this guy is a revolutionary one. But, we will get to this guy's fate shortly.
Oh God, this guy ended up somebody's wife, I guess. Final Russians.
You're in the ballpark.
There you go.
You're in the ballpark. I'm going to just say that for now.
If this was jail, I'd be like, he'd put up a fight, but he'd lose.
So, the first real feather in Mayakovsky's cap after the revolution it's also truly his pièce de résistance. He writes plays where the audience is expected to participate. And like, I don't mean like a British farce or pantomime where you're supposed to boo the villain when he's sneaking around stage with a handlebar mustache. I don't mean that. He writes a play called Mystery Boof. I don't know what that means. But in Mystery Boof, there are two groups of people engaged in a cosmic struggle, the clean and the unclean.
I wonder who the good guys are.
Well, the clean eventually vanquish the unclean and create a utopia. But more importantly, the actors are going to start talking to the audience and get them chanting against the unclean.
So this is just more like old Slavic traditions kind of being repackaged.
Well, more explicitly, he's going to get them cheering when the leader of the unclean is overthrown.
Jesus Christ.
Now, when I took a class in the history of theater when I was like an 18-year-old freshman, the prof talked about how for thousands of years you had the fourth wall and the proscenium arch, or maybe the apron is extending into the audience, and then over time you had characters start to break the fourth wall, or plays like Six Characters in Search of an Author where the characters know that they're characters in a play. Or you had people like Bertolt Brecht who wrote plays where the fourth wall didn't really exist at all. And then eventually you had Beckett who was writing about characters who were just following random stage directions. You know, that's kind of a horrible way to frame the history of theater because it doesn't get to the main thrust, which is that theater is yet another medium that was deconstructing itself in the 1920s. And that is what Mayakovsky is doing by having characters talking to the audience, getting them to yell at the uncleans. But about Mayakovsky's play, what would you have seen if you were in the audience? Well, remember we've been talking about constructivism in this whole episode, everything looking like it's made out of leftover scraps from Home Depot. Here's what you would have seen if you were at the opening of Mystery Boof.
Were they fucking staging this in like wartime Stalingrad? Like what the hell is it?
Constructivist sets. The costumes were actually created by Malevich, the black square guy.
This looks like the video for That Boy Needs Therapy by the fucking
Well,
by the Avalanche.
So the opening monologue of this play is basically a character coming out and saying, guys, you're not watching Chekhov anymore.
Oh, wow. Talk about on the nose, Jesus.
Now, who did Mayakovsky cast to play the leader of the clean revolutionaries who have to vanquish the unclean?
Who?
Himself.
There we go.
Can you imagine somebody writing experimental revolutionary theater and casting himself in a heroic role?
This was his one-man show. He just had
Now, it's a total attack on imperialist theater, as you can tell, and it's also the first major piece of radical Soviet propaganda. What happened? They opened the show and it's an absolute flop. Because remember, this is right after the revolution. The people who had lived in Moscow up until the revolution had seen proper theater. They don't want to see this shit.
Yeah, this would not be a crowd pleaser.
Nobody in the intelligentsia can just call straight up bullshit on this stuff and say that it wasn't a very good play, so theater professors will usually say something like, oh, the audience just wasn't ready for this.
Yeah.
So what really happened? The revolution is only a few months old in 1918. The Soviets haven't gone full Soviet yet. And the theater critics in Moscow just say, guys, we are not going to even dignify this bullshit with a review.
Yep.
The party apparatchiks watched the play and said, you guys are banned from ever performing this again.
I'm going to go be a fascist. That was so bad.
In fact, they were planning the upcoming May Day celebration. And they said, no, you're not allowed. You are banned from the May Day celebration.
They got their May Day celebration.
Now, the guy who they got to direct this play, he was a man named Zvold Meyerhold. He was a little bit older, but he was sympathetic to these experimental theories of art. So people thought that we're going to get some old theatrical stalwart to make everybody love this stuff. He was also one of the few bigwigs in the Moscow theater scene who actually supported the Bolsheviks, so that also helped him get the role. get the gig as the director. And a decade later, when Stalin has established the way he rolls, he decides that art now needs to be a little more formal. So Meyerhold, the director of this play, he gets invited to choreograph a ballet in Moscow. And at some point, he makes a comment that he still kind of wants to do this kind of theater and is promptly arrested for being subversive. Take notes.
Yep.
Then he's tortured to the point where he admits to being a British and Japanese spy.
Yeah, there you go. That's my Soviets.
Then he's put in front of a firing squad.
Yeah.
And because he's a man of the theater, he's a man who knows how to express himself, and in his final days he writes a letter describing the torture he was put through. And if you want an idea of just how sadistic and humane the Russians can be, this guy's letter is a pretty good place to start. He talks about them like holding hot pokers to his feet.
Oh.
And he says just by the end he was ready to admit to anything,
Yeah.
just to finish the pain. Yeah.
Everybody's tough till you got a hot poker against.
Oh yeah. Again, and this is a man who knows how to express himself in these letters. Just Google Meyerhold's letters about being tortured if you want just true insight into the Russian psyche.
So there's not no sadism. Say they're gifted when it comes to sadism.
So this sets the tone for avant-garde art in the post-revolutionary period. Everybody hates it, including the government. And Lenin and Stalin, they are not Hitler, so they don't exactly have the same level of art appreciation. And from this point forward, they're just going to refer to all avant-garde art disparagingly as futurism. This is primitivist, this is constructivist. Yeah, it's futurist.
These people love slightly changing the name of their nonsense.
Yeah.
And then saying like, oh, we're not that. You don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it doesn't fly with Stalin.
No.
Because everything has to start from scratch post-revolution, and because these avant-garde artists are put in charge of all of these new institutions, we're going to get two problems. The first is that this weird creative bullshit is fine for giving the middle finger to the old order, but when you need to rebuild a government for the world's largest country, you need more than a few eccentric alcoholic gopniks. You need people who actually know how to manage a government. And the second problem is that it really doesn't take that long for these avant-garde groups to devolve into infighting, as always happens with a group of eccentrics.
Nothing changes.
Yeah. Well, the only thing different now is that these rival groups of retarded academics and avant-garde artists, they now have the weaponry of the state, if they play their cards right, to direct against their opponents.
Just take a moment to imagine a world where our modern retarded academics had the government behind them, fully.
You suggest that certain controversial theories about human biology might be true, and
you're done.
in some countries you're going to jail.
Oh yeah, absolutely, including this one.
So, like any other group of creatives, avant-garde artists, they don't really hate people who are into classical art. If anything, they just pity those people for their lack of enlightenment. But avant-garde artists absolutely despise other avant-garde artists who have a slightly different concept of art. You see this very early on as these old academies are shut down and the new academies are created. And the new academies are staffed by mostly Jewish intellectuals who will not hesitate to stab each other in the back. Anybody who thinks that the Jews just want to stab the Goyim in the back, no, they want to stab each other in the back too.
Yeah, you can't, it's funny, like most anti-Semites I know just have clearly never met these people.
Yes.
They're fire-breathing and they have horns. No, these are very neurotic, complicated individuals.
So Marc Chagall, one of the more famous avant-garde artist who comes from the tribe, he gets invited to head up one of these new schools in Vitebsk, and he invites his friend Malevich along. Now, Chagall, and again, these are both members of the tribe, just to be very clear. Chagall, he likes his almost ethereal, whimsical paintings of the shtetl. Here's one of his more famous works.
That looks like My Little Pony fan fiction.
Well, it's clearly cubist. You know, you have the aesthetic of things being broken into a bunch of pieces and then pasted on the canvas, but it also kind of tells a story by having a bunch of scenes at the same time. It's supposed to be about Jewish farmers, but who knows?
Again, you can tell that he wants to be the pony. That's his persona or whatever the hell they call
The
it.
first one.
Well, the
Oh, no,
persona, but then
the
there's like a
bronies,
special
yeah.
one for being a freaking pony.
The bronies.
The bronies, but they anyway. God. We're doomed.
No,
Just
yeah,
to
we
be
are.
clear, our civilization is doomed.
Yeah, by the time the word brony enters the lexicon,
Yeah,
it's
done.
over. You're past the point of no return. Like, people wonder, you know, how do we fight and win these battles? These battles were lost before we were born.
Yeah.
Chagall, like I said, he likes his almost ethereal and whimsical paintings. It's very different than Malevich, who thought that art should consist of black squares. And on the first anniversary of the revolution, Chagall, Mr. Whimsical, he commissions a bunch of paintings of horses and cows about the town, and Malevich immediately denounces it as non-revolutionary and takes his job as the head of the school.
So it's like the Hispanic gangs that are calling ice on each other in
Well,
LA right
to
now.
be very clear, Chagall, like I just said, Chagall invited Malevich to teach at the school, and just within a year, Malevich just usurped him by saying his art was counter-revolutionary.
Sorry, guys. You want to win or not? Well, this is how.
No, again, these are a bunch of creative Jews. They don't even want to win. They just want to stab each other in the back
Yeah.
and get their more avant-garde theory. My theory is more avant-garde than yours. That's all they want to prove.
You were very dismissive in my bar mitzvah.
The exact same dynamic basically plays out when Kandinsky he gets appointed the head of the Institute of Artistic Culture. And remember, Kandinsky, we talked about him as well. He's part of the Blue Rider movement, all about abstraction and believing you should feel an abstract painting the same way you should experience a piece of music. Like, all right, this is one of the first truly, as they call it, non-objective paintings. Like, it's not even supposed to be a picture of anything. He says, I'm just supposed to experience this.
Yeah.
There is a possibly apocryphal story about how he did one of these paintings where he was just splashing a bunch of paint on the canvas, then went out for a walk, and his assistant had turned it 90 degrees. He comes back, I like it more this way. If you don't know which way your own painting is supposed to be oriented, I'm going to say you need to work a little more on things.
You're a simp.
But Kandinsky, when he gets appointed as a Soviet apparatchik, he starts talking about this spiritual stuff again, and he is promptly shit-canned just the way that Chagall was. And he was replaced by a man named Osip Brick. Osip Brick gave a speech saying that painters should give up painting and start designing things that can be mass-produced. And he makes some enemies doing that, but who cares, because he has the sweet government posting.
I'm just picturing like the Happy Merchant meme with like a fake artist mask. Put that into AI maybe. I don't know. Anyway.
Well, who is this Osip Brick guy? Well, he's a friend of Mayakovsky, our favorite drunk futurist Gopnik. The two of them collaborate on a magazine called LEF, which in Russian roughly translates to the left front of art. And more importantly, his wife is somebody who we've already seen even in this episode. That woman.
Oh,
You were asking about who this woman was.
she's not my manic pixie dream girl.
No, she's not. But you also asked if she had to like do some Harvey Weinstein stuff to get in. This is Osip Brick's wife.
Oh, she did have to do some Harvey Weinstein.
Well,
Okay.
just wait.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, she's the woman in this poster that was done by Rodchenko, because again, these people all fit around a table,
Yep.
and what is or isn't art, or what is or isn't constructivism, depends on the petty squabbles of an insular group of neurotic Eastern European Jews from 100 years ago.
This explains a lot about some aspects of art.
But you live by public policy, you die by public policy, because as early as 1921, and certainly by 1923, the government says, wait a second, You've been trying to propagandize the Gopniks for a couple of years now, and they don't seem to understand your theories of black squares and frowns. Maybe you guys are the pretentious ones. And you do not really want to be 5 years into a communist revolution and have the government decide you're being elitist.
No.
All of your odes to the common man and your audience participation theater are not going to save you. Worse yet, there's now going to be some official newspaper articles saying your silly ideas are subverting the proletariat.
Oh, yeah. And it's a short trip from there to the Gulag. Get to be Solzhenitsyn's roommate.
In 1922, a new government organization called the Artists of Revolutionary Russia, or AKHRR, is established. And they are going to be put in charge of propagandizing people. And they are going to be staffed by a bunch of older pre-revolutionary painters from the age of the Tsar, from the old Tsarist academy called the Peredvishniki, the ones who did things in the realistic way. So there you have it. Here today, gone tomorrow, like a Deus Ex Machina. The Soviet head of arts and culture, Lunacharsky, he declares that the new slogan is going to be back to the Peredvishniki. And they're going to go right back to painting canvases, mostly of the peasants and the factory workers and the Red Army and comrades Lenin and Stalin. It's going to be called socialist realism. So here's a few examples of socialist realism. Is that?
Looks like a gay nightclub.
Well, it's still in the 20s, so you can still see the modern aesthetic. It's not 30s art, which goes really conservative. But you can definitely see that they're giving up the geometric shapes of triangles going into circles. Then here's the next one. This is called Building of the New Factory. Like I said, these people just wanted to build the next Eiffel Tower. That's what these people wanted to do. You can clearly see that there.
All Russians ever want is to be from Paris.
Here's the next one. This is called the Donbass. You may have heard that word in the news recently, last couple of years.
That one's been important.
So again, it's the modern aesthetic, but it's gone right back to fetishizing the farmers and factory workers.
It's fan fiction about fucking working people.
Yeah. The most important thing is that it leans on neoclassicism more than it leans on impressionism. Like, watch the third episode if you don't know what I'm talking about. But it still has that self-awareness of modern art. That's going to go away in the 1930s. And we will have an episode on the 1930s, but we're not there yet. We're still in our Rashomon flashbacks about the 20s. But here's a preview of the 30s, which is probably more of the Soviet propaganda that you're familiar with. There's that one, the peasants. I think this looks a little bit more like the Soviet propaganda you might expect.
It's called No Potato, No Problem.
Yeah, it's called Red Army Soldier on the Collective Farm, so yes.
Hey, I got it right. Look at me. It's my genetics coming up for me.
This is Workers at Uralmash by Pinero, I don't know how you pronounce that, in 1934.
This is called Choice of Rape.
Here is a painting of the Red Army. Here's a painting that this is actually from World War II, so it's actually from the 40s, not the 30s. But again, this is what you expect, yeah, of Soviet stylistic propaganda.
They're still ratting on about this. This is the time they beat the Germans.
Oh yeah. And then here's what you expect, Comrade Stalin. This isn't Mussolini, who had his face done in a bunch of weird futurist methods. This guy just says, no, I am dictator, I send you to Gulag, you paint a picture of me.
And this is what the Kims are aspiring to every time they do a PR photo.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
The same suit. Geez, they have similar clothing. Okay.
So it's exactly the same thing as what happened in Italy. The futurists were replaced with the Novecento in Italy. Well, in Russia, the constructivists are replaced with the AKHRR and socialist realism. The Soviet avant-garde is finished. It's done. Or at least they're finished in Russia, because Bolshevism is an international movement, and the Comintern would love to foment revolution in other places. Lenin and later Stalin, they would be perfectly happy to have a Soviet avant-garde as long as it's in Berlin. And that's going to be a teaser for the next episode, because after a decade of communist subversive avant-garde art in Berlin, the Germans are going to elect a leader in the early 30s who has some strong opinions on art.
He's not going to be gentle with these people.
But that's the next episode. That's going to be about Berlin in the 20s. I'm just going to wrap up the loose ends and finish this story off. In Russia, Lenin, he makes a declaration, basically in black and white, that all this avant-garde shit is finished, and all art from now on has to represent the party line. All literature has to be party literature, and everything has to systematically be a part of the system of Soviet realism. Also, it's Soviet Russia, at least at this point early on. They didn't need to gulag people yet because there's only one place to buy paints. Mm-hmm. And if you're one of the few people allowed to buy paints, you're probably doing it for government commission. So if you try to do any weird non-kosher stuff, your supplies are getting cut off really quickly.
I've always said that the greatest defenses the Slavic people have is the horrible infrastructure and inability to do logistics.
Yep.
Like, it's their worst enemy, but it's their greatest defense at the end of the day. Like,
it's a country of bottlenecks.
Yeah. You drive to Kiev.
See, the great thing about that joke is that people are going to be watching this episode 5 years from now, and that war is still going to be going on.
Same thing. I probably referenced like the micro thing. Oh, did you hear they sent in the special forces to hunt down the gopniks on the motorcycles?
Ah. We were talking about Russian sadism.
Is there anything they do that orcs don't do? That's all I want to know.
This bottleneck in the art supplies, it probably actually saved a few people's skins for a few years because Lenin said, I'm not competent to make judgments on art, so nobody was going to be hurt for making improper art. But the real killing blow came in 1923 when Lenin said, wait a second, we just fought a civil war and the country's in debt. We need to pay it off somehow. I guess we need to be capitalists for a little while. That part always gets airbrushed out of the story, by the way.
In China, too.
Yep. So Lenin introduces the new economic policy. Pierre Trudeau did that in the 70s as well, but most people aren't going to know why that's a sore spot for certain people. But yeah, Lenin introduces the new economic policy, partially restoring the private sector, and when the private sector is restored, people have a bit more say in what kind of entertainment they want to consume, and all of this experimental art just goes away. You know, because then, just as now, who gets funding from the art committees? If people wanted to buy your shit, they wouldn't be going to the art committee hand in hand.
Yep. If it's commercially viable, it's not getting the government grant.
No. Malevich's black squares, Rodchenko's constructions, Lisitsky's browns, they're all finished, if not immediately, then at least by the time that Stalin starts chasing out the Trotskyites a couple of years later. And yet, they're somehow not a footnote. They have somehow made their way into the academic narrative, even though none of it would exist if the Soviet state hadn't propped it up for the first couple of years. Tatlin, the Gopnik who designed the monument, that weird spiral tower with the motorcycles supposedly driving up, he gets a letter from Trotsky in 1924 saying, circumstances now offer you time to find arguments in defense of your point of view. Tatlin lives another 30 years and never produces anything, so ends the life of below the town retard. But you see something, this is not art history anymore, this is just history. This is driven by governments and politics, and the art itself is almost secondary to what we're talking about now. The rest of the 20s in the Soviet Union is going to be this new organization, the AKHRR, fighting with the various creative groups hostile to it. But then in 1931, Stalin is just going to step in and say he's had enough of these intellectual debates. You make beautiful canvas, or I do to you what I do to Ukrainian peasants. For the remainder of the 20s, Rodchenko and Brick, they're going to at least go along with this new socialist realism, agreeing to make propaganda and advertisements for commercial products. Rodchenko, he may have had some truly stupid academic theories, but again, he did have talent. And just as he was a good graphic designer, he's actually a pretty good photographer as well, especially now that the handheld Leica camera has just been invented. Remember, a lot of artistic development is just technological development, and I'm not going to make this episode drag on any longer. You can Google some of Rodchenko's photographs, and some are quite well done. I'm just going to show one example. This is a woman walking up the stairs, but I'm not questioning the man's talent. The fact that guy could set up a picture like this when the handheld camera was something completely new. Yeah, not questioning his technical talent. Just don't want him anywhere near the Ministry of Art. As for our friend Mayakovsky, the eccentric Gopnik, in the age of socialist realism, he is going to try writing some plays satirizing the Russian government. Again, this is pre-Holodomor and pre-Purge. So,
Soon there will be less people to complain.
Well, but also soon I will be afraid of complaining. These plays don't go over super well with the government censors, but they do get produced. Mayakovsky, he also lives with Osip Brick and his wife Lilia, the woman in that propaganda poster. And because Jews are going to Jew, these two are in an open marriage.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Brick and Lilia are in the open marriage, and Mayakovsky sees Lilia as his muse, seeing her as a strong, independent woman who he bases a bunch of his characters on.
Some Roman Polanski shit.
Nothing new under the sun.
Yep.
Also remember Rodchenko, the guy who did this this photograph on the screen right now? Lily is also fucking him on the side as well. So again, this is just a ridiculously small group of sexual degenerates who all know each other.
Artist's gonna artist.
Mayakovsky also dedicates a couple of his poems to her, but this is just not a formula for sanity, letting the village bicycle be your muse, especially if you are an eccentric creative prone to emotional highs and lows. Because as the 20s wear on, his career slows down as the critics don't exactly want to praise plays that satirize the government when Stalin is becoming increasingly cranky about such things.
Every play. Man, that needed more Stalin.
Then Mayakovsky gets a throat infection, which is not good when your line of work is writing poetry that needs to be chanted out. Then he is denied a visa to travel abroad, so his life is not going so well at this point. And then probably the straw that breaks the camel's back is that he falls in love with another married woman. This time she's an actress.
Oh!
Again, that's a formula for leading a stable life, right?
And with high sexual morality.
So remember how I said that this was originally going to be structured like Boogie Nights, with one episode about the 20s with the mood of the avant-garde experimental aesthetics, followed by an episode about the 30s where everything had the conservative aesthetic? This was going to fit that narrative perfectly because Mayakovsky is kind of like William H. Macy's character, the guy whose wife was getting gangbanged in the driveway. In the year 1930, at age 36, right when the decades were going to turn over and the aesthetics were going to turn over as well, Mayakovsky kills himself over the drama induced by the kind of women and lifestyle that he wants to pursue.
Talk about drama in your polycule.
Yes. Again, the people who think they're doing polycules think they're, edgy. Especially they all do the exact same kind of art as well.
Yep. They have the same kind of political beliefs.
The sad thing about them is just how it's not just that they're not original because they're all like each other. They're all like the exact same degenerates from 100 years ago. But in some sense, Mayakovsky is like the Kurt Cobain of the early Soviet Union because he went out right before art became praise Stalin or else. Because remember, he died in 1930. That happened in 1931. So he can be remembered the same way that Kurt Cobain was remembered, as an autistic train wreck with poor choice in women.
And a smack problem.
Yeah, but, when he went out, the broken, youthful idealist shtick was starting to wear thin, but he still died right before his image could really change. So he's emblematic of the first few years of the 20s, the way that Kurt Cobain is emblematic of the first few years of the 90s. Now, if I had been able to cram the entire 20s into one episode, if I didn't have to do these multiple Rashomon-style episodes, this is where I would end it, Boogie Nights style, with a title card that just says the 30s. Just like in Boogie Nights, when the character kills himself, it flashes up a title card that says the 80s. But like I said, this isn't Boogie Nights, this is Rashomon. We've looked at 20s art in Rome, we've looked at 20s art in Moscow, now we need to look at 20s art in Berlin, and we'll talk about that in the next episode. But here's the last word on Mayakovsky, the eccentric Gothic futurist who checked out in the year 1930. His legacy would have probably been very different if he hadn't killed himself right then and there. Because in 1931, that's when Stalin brought down the hammer on the arts community and said, I have had enough of this art with a message or a theory attached. You're going to be my mouthpiece. And if you try to be too much of an artiste, you're getting shipped to the gulag or told to face the wall or both. Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, they all died young, but there is a certain mystique to having your life synonymous with the 60s. In creative circles, at least in past generations, Mayakovsky had that exact same mystique because his story was synonymous with the 1920s. And as we have said many times, the 1920s was the last decade that had any real effect on our culture. And that's where I'm ending this episode.
Great job, buddy. I always learn so much doing these. All right, you know the drill. Like and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Support us at kofi.com/Radio Free History or at subscribestar.com/radio-free-history.